Hi everyone. I'm going to do my 12th presentation on the IMF World Bank meetings, and today we are going to take a look at, well, first kind of a look back in history. So global economy, 2008 collapse, financial collapse, Christine Lagarde, no lessons learned, and Orwellian future. Christine Lagarde, for those who do not know, was the managing director of the IMF after Dominique Strauss-Kahn was arrested in 2011. And that was really, he was arrested in New York for assault of a hotel maid, Sofitel Hotel, which is a French corporate chain, which, as I keep on pointing out to everybody, was involved in intervening in the political process, the French political process on American soil. Because that was, and as I said at the time, to IMF spouses, they can attest, I said it at the time, oh, the moment I heard, it was the day after, they were the ones who told me, I said, oh, that's a political coup to take him out of the running against Sarkozy. And effectively it was. So, New York courts has been playing party politics on both sides of the Atlantic. That's why I, jumped in, and I also defend Prince Andrew, unless you can bring me some concrete proof that the man did something wrong besides a photo standing next to Virginia Giuffre, which indicates no wrongdoing whatsoever, even if it is original, and I'm sick and tired of that debate. Also, this gets into the, Tyler Robinson case. Again, you cannot produce something and say, no, where is the original? Where is the mega data that proves what your evidence is not doctored and bullshit and false? This is what due process is about. So anyway, let's take a listen to Christine Lagarde interviewing Michael Lewis.
That's me, and
which has convened some of its members and is finding this event interesting, and all our guests
here,
morning, and we're delighted to welcome all guests, whether they are IMF staff, members of their family, because I know that the Family Association has convened some of its members and is finding this event.
Oh, I was pissed as shit when I heard her say this. I had covered the IMF World Bank spring meetings, and I was going to go to the annual meetings. Now, the day I went to go and pick up my badge, and they didn't have my badge, and the girls that I used to work with in the Institute for Capacity Development, they start giving me attitude. I was pissed. Because I had also just come from Judiciary Square, because I was in the middle of some bullshit court with my landlord. My landlord was trying to charge me for 2 rooms instead of the 1 room that I was occupying, because the girl living next door, she had moved out. The rent was too high. The landlord couldn't rent it out, so she said that I had to pay for it. I said, no, I'm not paying for it. It's your responsibility to rent the rooms out. You want to pay me to manage your property? That's one thing, and we can negotiate that. Like, you give me a room for free, and I'll get somebody in here. You want to work it that way, but no. So we ended up in the courts. Anyway, I got the evidence that I needed against the DC courts, while all of these people are playing, party hardy. And I had been illegally terminated from the Institute for Capacity Development, where these girls were working. As I say, I went to go and pick up my badge for the annual meetings. The girls picked a fight with me. I got pissed off. And then when I came back just to attend the meetings, they called security and said that I had to leave. I mean, I was like, you guys really are out of control. Because everybody had complained to me, everybody in the department had complained to me for the 4 years that I was there about the bullying and the mismanagement by the office manager. Then they were getting the new office manager, Adrian Thapa. And that was even worse. And I'm the only one who's going up about these issues. These guys are talking about human rights, labor rights, all of this bullshit all over the place. They get up on podiums, but it means that none of them, I mean, that shit is going on. All of these problems are rampant within their own organization. Got a clean house. They're a bunch of hypocrites. And why am I first the minimum wage temp, and then finally they get me contractual, because there had been many complaints that I couldn't access anything by the economists. I was like, excuse me, you economists, why am I the only one with any balls and standing up against all of this shit? And everybody's coming to me because they know I'm the only one who's doing anything about it. You guys are with the 6-figure salaries and sitting pretty and have all of the contacts with all the lawyers in this town. All you got to do is pick up the phone and say, look, we are a real problem here. And actually, there's a woman here in here that can take them down. We get this into the courts with the Dominique Strauss-Kahn shit and how he was fired. It's been exposed, the problem of harassment in here. Christine Lagarde promised when she came in that these problems would be addressed. Now, the IMF Family Association, where I worked before ICD, where I've also been illegally terminated, they had told me about, these are the spouses. They had told me about all of the internal mismanagement problems and the bullying and sexual harassment and extramarital affairs at all of these Davos and spring meetings, annual meetings that goes on, and all of the bullshit that's going on. So I heard it from the wives before I saw it with the in real life. So, why am I taking all of this shit on? And I get ousted, and one of the girls says to me, oh, I don't want to become involved. She's with GP Global Partnerships, the one getting money from all of this. That was Mark Lewis. Well, we got Michael Lewis here, Mark Lewis, he was the head of Global Partnership. He had been Turkey Res Rep. He's Harvard, and that little hornet's nest, of which Sharmini Curry, the head of that, of the ICD, is a part, and a Larry Summer honeypot. So that gives you some background and shit. But as I say, when she's going, and we have the IMF Family Association people, I'm like, oh yeah, you oust me, you don't let me come in because I got a brain and I got some balls, and you let your stupid bimbo, gold digging whores in the IMF Family Association come in.
And interesting, and all our guests on the occasion of these annual meetings. We have decided for the first time to do something slightly different with very high-level participation on the other side of the table. But a bit unusual because it is not your normal double PhD, although not necessarily somebody who is writing massive books on macroeconomics with plenty of charts across the board and back and forth, but somebody who's...
Yeah, see, this is what they always have. Keep it real complicated and all of that shit. In my international econ class at GW, everybody had told me drop bad, because even the econ majors fail at least once. I was like, you guys, I can't, it's the only thing that fits into my schedule. I was working for the senator in the mornings and working in restaurants, nightclubs, in the evenings, paying my way through school, and I had to take courses which fit in the afternoons, and I couldn't pick and choose like everybody else. So anyway, I was like, there's nothing else, and econ's easy. So I took it I would, the first 15, 20 minutes, take the notes. No, I wasn't sleeping. I was resting my eyes. So the teacher didn't like me because here I was, sitting in the back of the room, write notes, and then kind of rest my eyes. I was exhausted. I was working, full time, plus going to school full time. So I was exhausted. And as my dad would say, I wasn't asleep. I was resting my eyes and I was listening, but it's this kind of half sleep. I don't know, military people probably understand what I'm talking about. You're in this kind of half sleep where you're totally conscious of everything that's going around, but it does give you a bit of, if you're exhausted, it gives you a little bit of a rest that, will carry you through until you can get some real sleep. So anyway, I got a 98 on the midterm. Everybody else failed because they said, curve it. No, we can't because it won't change anything. And everybody turned around and looked at me. I was like, I'm sorry. So I tutored my classmates for the final. They all passed with flying colors. And I told them, I said, you know what? When the first tutorial I did, I had I just photocopied all of my notes, passed it out to everybody. I said, look, forget everything that you have learned from him, and here's the deal. And we went through, the notes, class by class. I think it took a week, an hour, 2 hour sessions, I forget. So 5 to 10 hours. Here it is, boom, boom, boom. Everybody passed the final with flying colors. I'd be curious to find out, because I'm like, somebody had to have gotten a hold. I gave them to everybody, copies of it. This is a course that everybody's failing right and left. And I'm sure somebody got a hold of those notes and then passed it out to everybody and probably started selling them. I don't care. I'm not going to sell them. But I was like, I'm sorry. I would be curious to find out if there was a spike, if people got a hold of those notes and the notes, like if people started passing his course after that. I always wondered about that.
It's taking a real interest in matters
No,
that...
they make it much more complicated than it is. It's all of the subjects, all of them. As Einstein said, if you know your subject well, you should be able to explain it to a barmaid.
Are of interest to the IMF. Obviously, he needs very little introduction, but we're going to give Michael Lewis a huge, big round of applause for accepting our invitation. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you.
And if it works, we might do it again another time. So, we have a challenge, Michael, here. Your books include, I don't want to forget any of them, and I'm sure I am going to forget. Liar's Poker, everybody knows that one. Flash Boys, everybody knows that one too. Big Short, and I'm only naming the big ones that everybody has read. Many of you have also seen the films that have been made out of those books and have found those stories, which are quite complicated as the way in which they eventually happened, clear, obvious. And that is one of the many talents that our guest has. So, the game we're going to play is the following. I ask you questions, you ask me questions, and we both commit to answer honestly. Shall we?
Can we just do 2 truths and a lie instead? Sure.
Maybe we can save the lies for the last ones, okay? Can I start?
You go first.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, you've written extensively about the financial world. You yourself had a role in the financial sector, which is one of the reasons you took a particular interest in how good or bad it can be. It does produce devastating effects, particularly in 2008 and following, destroyed massive wealth. Do you think things have changed?
That's a big question. Obviously, some things have changed. Can I back up just a little bit?
Yes, please.
So First, let us just acknowledge how improbable it is I'm sitting up here on this stage with you. When I was telling Christine backstage that when I was coming out of the London School of Economics, I wandered into a job interview with the IMF, and there was a ruthless German there who took about 60 seconds to realize I had absolutely no business being there, and the next 30 minutes demonstrating that. And if you told that man, I wish I knew it, I hope he's here, that I would be sitting on stage with her, or actually that she would be sitting on stage at that point would be the idea of a woman running the IMF, right? So things have changed. But
you're not looking for a job eventually?
Well, you never know. But I'd like to think that instead of a job, if you're looking to compensate me, just a little more material would be great. So when you ask me, have things changed?
Yeah.
I was aware when I was writing Liar's Poker that I was writing about a financial culture that was in transformation. And it was very clear then that there were some big things at work that were potentially corrosive. They were the decline of the partnership structure at the center of American finance, so transformation from partnerships to corporations, the rising complexity of financial instruments, which quickly came to function as the form of opacity. That all the dark wood panel came down, all the glass went up, it all seemed more transparent, but as it got more complicated, it didn't matter, it might as well have been dark wood panel. And the rise of the idea that these banks were essentially not service enterprises, but trading enterprises, to the point where, the one I work for, Salomon Brothers.
Very important, not service enterprises, but trading enterprises. This is super important.
In 1990 and 91, the proprietary trading desk, which was just a dozen people, and a firm of 8,000 people, generated more than 100% of the firm's profits. Oof. So the rest of the firm is unprofitable. Everything is aimed at these trading books. Flash forward to the financial crisis. It's very clear that all three of these changes play a very big role going into 2008. I mean, the question that brings me back to the story, I didn't think I was ever going to write about Wall Street again, but I couldn't believe that it wasn't that I couldn't believe that the big Wall Street banks would do bad things to the rest of the world. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me is that they would commit suicide, and that there are attempts suicide. That if you look back away from our financial system, for 30 years plus, it's had call on the best and the brightest across the Western world. And the people it's attracting are not unself-interested people. And yet somehow, when they came together in these organizations, they tried to commit suicide. It was a disaster. How those banks became the dumb money was what got me back in. And it was very clear there were lots of bad incentives at the heart of the thing that caused individuals in the banks to do things that were good for themselves but bad for the institution. Right. So when you ask, has it changed? I think, have the forces that led to the crisis been in any way offset by regulation? Has the financial sector been kicked on some different course? And I think, well, there have been some changes in compensation to try to make the relationship between the Wall Street employee and the employer look more like the relationships in the old partnership system. But it's not nearly enough. There's certainly not been a decline in the complexity of the instruments. I mean, the complexity of the instruments played a very big role. So that hasn't changed at all. And there's been some effort to reduce the importance of proprietary trading in the big institutions. But there's this whole other question. I hate to go on for too long. But
No, come on.
So it's a two-part question, because one is, have things changed in such a way that will reduce the likelihood that these banks these giant financial institutions will commit suicide and bring us all down with them? Well, yes, there's been some change there. Has it changed in such a way that they are less likely to do bad things to the rest of us? Much less so. But more importantly, in a weird way, has the wider public been persuaded that the change has happened? And not at all. What regulation has been implemented is so complicated and poorly described to the public that if you wander the streets and ask people what happened, what did they do about Wall Street, people would say basically nothing. The banks seem to be bigger. They're still doing poisonous things like this Wells Fargo scandal. I mean, there's not the toxic.
One of my pet peeves, and this is also what nobody's really looking into, is the complicity of consumers and Americans. Okay, we are looking at primarily America, but this is global. But the consumers, stop being these buy, over-indebt yourself. Be responsible. So that's not looked at enough. But also, new products. They always come up with something new. I remember after the 2008 collapse, a Spanish woman I know in Baltimore, she told me, she was doing reverse mortgages in real estate. And I was like, what's that? And she was promoting it. In fact, when she came to her boss about the whole thing, about, let's can I push, let's start pushing reverse mortgages. This reminds me of Mike Milken and the junk bonds. But anyway, start developing that market. And her boss was like, that's bullshit. There's nothing in that market. Oh, yeah. I mean, she was onto something. Unfortunately, counterproductive in the long run.
Between the financial sector and the rest of the society has not been addressed.
Not been cured.
Not been cured. And you see the political consequences. So I think it's still a big problem. But that's just me. And
it's just Wall Street, isn't it? Because if we look at the city, and I just want to recognize somebody who's sitting there, Minouche Shafik, who's been a member of the IMF and has been instrumental in working on the regulations that apply in the UK. You know Minouche as well.
The Bank of England has made a much greater attempt.
Yeah, okay, regulations in the UK. See, Minouche Shafik, she was first World Bank, but then IMF, and she was in the executive directors, and with Sharman and Curry started the Institute for Capacity Development. I've already talked about them a bit. I will go into them at other times, but yeah, that's so. After Nimesh Shafik, after that, she's over at London School of Economics, then the Bank of England, and then after that, so at this time, Bank of England, and then Columbia University. This is how they, their careers, it's all this buddy-buddy network. It's the same, it's no different than the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, the Astors, Vanderbilts, then you had the Rockefellers, the Roosevelts who came in, and the Kennedys, different. If you go on ancestry.com, you can find a lot of those families I'm looking into, and the new ones. These guys just boarded the choo-choo train, and this is the thing: they're new passengers, so they're willing to drink and pass out Kool-Aid, much more so than the old folks who have been around and see passengers come and be thrown off many a time.
To attack the culture of finance,
right?
And that has to happen, I think. It may be. I don't know enough about what's actually happened in every other country.
Right.
The truth is, let us just accept the truth that I'm a bit of a fraud here. I write stories, I write books, and I move in for a story and then I move out, and I don't pay much attention afterwards. But I have paid attention to Wall Street. What do you think? Do you think anything I just say?
But see, this is the problem with all of these journalist podcasters. It's the story. They're chasing the story. They're chasing the story. And anything outside that story is irrelevant. And then they get on to their next story. That's kind of the same issue that we see with the lawyers. And this is where there's a conflict of interest with the lawyers, because their loyalty is to the courts, the judges. They're going to see this judge in the future. They've seen him in the past. They're going to see him in the future. They got to deal with this judge. Their client, probably a one-time deal, maybe a revolving door. Now, if it becomes a revolving door, well, then they do have an interest, because this is a good cash cow for them. But, if it's just a one-time deal, two-time deal, three-time deal, their loyalty is to the courts, and then also their partners in crime, the legal community, who they this time they might be up against, later on, they might be sitting on the same side of the table. And the poor schmuck in the courtroom is the pawn of everybody involved.
Strike you as completely idiotic?
No.
All right, that's good.
No, I don't. First of all, I don't want to offend you right now, because I don't want you to leave that podium for the moment. But I think a lot of what you said is right. There have been lots of other things that have taken place, which hopefully makes those systems more suicide resistant, and taxpayers less accountable for the mess that is eventually being created. So I think that's a plus. But they would the regulators and the supervisors would themselves admit that there is still work to be done. On the complexity of instruments, absolutely, and we're not there yet.
Yeah, and they've inundated yet another generation of snot-nosed brat nipple babies coming out of Ivy League schools with student debt, no morals, no scruples, no brains, and who have been told that they're God's gift to the world and they're going to do great things and they're going to have a temper tantrum and meltdown like Katie Miller did on Piers Morgan's podcast. Oh, that was classic. That is a moment in history. Katie Miller's meltdown against Shank of the Young Turks on Piers Morgan's podcast. Google it. Precious.
Not at all.
So one of the things I remember thinking as I was working on both The Big Short and what became Boomerang, the series I wrote about the European crisis, especially in Iceland, was how much better off we probably all would have been if men had been removed from the top of every large financial institution and women had been put in their place. And there's actually
these comments like that. I'm like, are you kidding? You're in a hornet's nest right here. Now, Christine Lagarde is probably the best of the lot from a how shall I say, personal perspective. I mean, as I say, I just crossed paths with her a couple of times in the corridors of the IMF at elevators in and out. But I mean, and the thing is she wasn't at all pretentious and like, she was, you let people out of an elevator before you go in. This is a rule that is universal across the globe. It's just common sense. Not always at the IMF. So anyway, yeah, I digress. Let's go. But oh God, you're in a hornet's nest of, the UN women. I want to see them in frickin' court. And one of the things that I keep on pointing out is Phyllis Chesler. She's a feminist, 18 books and counting. One of them is Women's Inhumanity to Women, and she was pressured by all of the other feminists. Oh, don't talk about the backstabbing witchery amongst women. You'll be a traitor to our cause, and this is a secret that we got to keep under wraps. She was raped by her boss when she was a contractual at the UN in 1978, but her colleagues told her that if she, pursued the issue, it was discrimination because the guy was black and she's white. Obviously, Jewish white. So, yeah. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Oh, Phyllis Chesler, she came to my presentation at the Battered Mothers Custody Conference on violence against women as human rights violations in 2015, but walked out after a few minutes. Don't know why. She never talked to me. Went to the conference, gave my spiel. I was like, oh God, you guys are just following the lead of what they do at these conferences. Oh, we're going to follow the lead of the experts instead of call them out.
Actually, there's wonderful research that's been done about male overconfidence and its financial effects. There's an economist named Terry O'Dean, who, boys will be boys. When I went into Iceland, that was, and I went when it was fresh. There was a real sense. You had this nation, this so-called nation of 300,000 people,
and banks,
and they all knew, and these three giant banks, and every Icelander knew this, that the men had screwed up the country. That the men.
Do you remember who fixed it?
A woman.
Yeah.
Not just a woman. A woman who was gay. A woman who would not even sleep with a man. But when I went in there, it was the men were so chastened. You could tell it was a moment. Every married man knows this moment where he has told his wife, "Yeah, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. We're not going to stop for directions. Don't look at the map." And then all of a sudden, you're
lost.
You're dead. And it was because these men who'd been fishermen and who'd always known what they were doing got into this new thing called finance. And basically their wives thought, well, they knew what they were doing when they're fishing. Maybe they know what they're doing now. And the moment I walk in, the only viable financial advisory firm in Iceland was it was a new one, run by a woman, and its business pitch was, if you let me advise you in your financial affairs, I promise no man will participate, that it will be just females giving advice. And people were banging down their doors to get in. So you could see in microcosm what I think happened more generally. And I'm groping towards a question for you, and the question is this. I was struck as the financial crisis unspooled, how quickly and ruthlessly the system treated women who were near power. It was incredible how much blame landed on female desks when there were so few females in high positions. So Erin Callan and Sally Krawcheck and Zoe Cruz and the woman who was with the London Whale and JP Morgan. It was just, there was always a woman to blame. So my question for you is, are you nervous? Because whenever I see a woman put in a position of prominence in finance, I think she's there for one reason, to take the fall if things go wrong. So
I'll tell you something, Michael. If I take the blame for anything for which I'm not responsible, I'll call on you to help me. I will.
So you...
For which she's not responsible? Oh my goodness. See, this is the problem. These people are they live in such a bubble. And I have to admit, I mean, I guess this is where I kind of understand Tucker Carlson. I mean, Tucker Carlson, we're the same age, we're some of the same, he went to prep school, St. George's, I went to Foxcroft. This is kind of the same area, the same group of people at the same era. And this cocaine everywhere, everybody party hardy. So I understand, how it is. How should I say? See, one of the things that with me is I lived abroad for 20 years. I wanted nothing to do with it. I was like, as I say, I was a princess in a pea. And I left. He got into the whole, drinking and passing out Kool-Aid, and he even admits it. But so your perspective my perspective is very different. But and you have to kind of go through this process of deprogramming. If you live within a society that's built on propaganda and hypocrisy, I mean, growing up, I saw the hypocrisy. I mean, we all did. My siblings, the friends would be like, yeah, our parents are crazy. Unfortunately, all these girls grew up and became just as crazy as their, girls and boys, mothers and fathers, and started drinking and passing in the same Kool-Aid, even though they denounced it when they were young. And so I'm like, well, what happened to you? Did they psyop you? And yeah, they did. And it's kind of you sell out, and you have these people, I know, because I went to school with them, that really don't know how to manage money, my lord, have marital affairs, all extramarital affairs. Just, I'm like, do you people ever grow up and take stock and assume responsibility for your lives? It's a whole soap opera. I mean, that's also why I'm disliked. Because I didn't live a soap opera. I mean, my ex-husband, he definitely was always looking for some soap opera, and also lived in his own little world and his own soap opera. But that's another story. But so Christine Lagarde is in this bubble, and she is in for a rude awakening, because yes, she is responsible. And I mean, I prove it. I've been proving it for at least the past 10 years.
This thought has not crossed your mind. There we go. I think we've had a frank moment here.
Do you remember how many were whistleblowers as well? Most whistleblowers in the pre-financial crisis. The big Aaron and was it Aaron? Aon.
Yeah.
Arthur Anderson. I mean,
Enron.
Enron. Thank you.
Enron.
The whistleblowers were all women.
Yeah.
Interesting. Huh?
It is interesting.
So
Candace Owens' father-in-law, he sold his metal trading company, high risk, high yield, to Enron a couple of years before it collapsed. And then he went to study a Bible for a couple of years. I think maybe he had a bit of a breakdown or something. I mean, anybody who wants to get in, live a life like that, needs to have their head examined, really. And that George, his son, got into that. Okay, then after, that's Candace Owens' husband, George. Then after he did metal tradings, then with his father, I think he had, yeah, I think he was always with his father. Then he had some sort of polling type of, for political polling. Then he ran for some political office for Brexit, then was involved in Parley, which also, I'm like, excuse me, everybody's like, oh, Candace and George. Oh, and George, he has a degree in theology. Candace is like, why theology? And he's like, oh, everything's about theology. I'm like, well, yeah, sort of, but actually, I got a business degree. I started poli-sci and I was like, this bullshit. Both the whole poli-sci curriculum and also what was going on Capitol Hill. But, yeah, okay, fine. I mean, I devoured literature, American and English literature. But no, I did a business degree, practical. I mean, it served me well. And I mean, the education that I had really was la creme de la creme in terms, even if, at Foxcroft, let's not talk about the student body, but, I mean, I had a good education, whether it be Catalina schools in Tucson, my school in England, Foxcroft at GW, bachelor, liberal arts with a BA in business, I mean, okay, accounting and stats, very painful, but useful to know what that's all about. Commercial law, very, very, very useful. Business environment, very useful. Just, all of it is useful. But this woman's in denial.
I can tell you, though, is that things have not materially changed. In other words, when it's really messy, the women come in. They restore the situation to a place where it becomes a bit stable, a bit better, and then somehow the men come back.
Yeah.
We need to go to Iceland together.
Yeah, we
see
do
what
need
it's
to go
like.
to Iceland together. It's pretty great. Well, so
see, the thing is using women as a success story in Iceland. That's like saying, oh, you know what? We got this story about female captain on a boat that was called the Titanic. Oh, well, did it avoid the iceberg? Oh, no, it hit the iceberg. So what's your point?
Anyway, I would love to know from you, because I'd love for you to explain to me why in 2016 there still are so few women in positions of great authority in the financial sector. What's the cause of that?
First of all, there are a few more. The Fed now has a woman leading it.
Again, cause for concern.
She receives a lot more.
Janet Yellen. I continually pull out the article, how homemakers help the economy, and within that article, they quote Janet Yellen saying that, we need women's entry into the workplace will increase GDP by 30%. And the article explains, well, this is a bad thing because the work that women previously did in the home and family was not taxable income. You're just taking that work, making it into jobs that pay an income, which also you're excluding homemakers from when they come back into the workplace after their children have left the nest or whatever reason. You're excluding them and discriminating against them, which is illegal, and that income tax is going into government coffers to then produce wars and more wars and mismanagement and oppressive governments. So no, it's not a good thing. And this is Janet Yellen, yet another case study of how putting women in possessions of power is not this wonderful thing that everybody pretends. They're just as likely or more so to drink and pass out Kool-Aid.
Criticism, in my view, than many of her predecessors in many ways, given the great job that she's doing.
Right.
Jeanette, that's for you. But it's true. When I look around the G20 room, finance ministers, very few women. When I look around our IMFC, which is the group of finance ministers and governors of central banks, very few women as well. And I really think that we all have to collectively, men and women, push in the direction that you have indicated, that women can actually bring a lot of value that is needed in the financial sector. It's okay if the trading is not as frequent and as rapid as the boys would like to have it.
Right.
Because if it brings a bit of stability and a bit of security to people at large and to that particular sector, which is vital and yet not exactly as it should be, it would be better. But it's not happening at the pace where it should.
I agree. I once.
But maybe you can help, because you are an incredible communicator. People who don't understand financial markets, people who don't get why the financial crisis started, people who don't understand what actually subprime means, you explained it all easily for the novice, for the layman, for the laywoman. Why can't you explain that women are better with a book, with a film, with something that really is just obvious?
It's funny you should ask that, because it's striking to me that there's been this hole in the market for these stories set in the financial sector. And the hole in the market exists because things aren't being explained clearly to ordinary people. When I set out to write, my ambition is always that my mother will want to read what I write and will understand it. And when you're faced with trying to explain to my mother a collateralized debt obligation, the task is daunting. Now, the funny thing about this ambition is I don't think my mother even reads my books, but I like to think that one day she might. But I have there are.
I bet you she would read it if you wrote the one that I suggested.
Yes. Well, so the story I have my unsliked ambition is to create a television drama. And the first television drama idea I had, and it's still kicking around, and I'm about to go try to push it again, was about 3 women who start a hedge fund. And the premise of the hedge fund is exploiting the idiocy of men. And so that's all they're doing, is they're finding the mistakes that men make and they're profiting from that. And that would enable me to get at the problem. Getting that on the air is hard. I thought I got close once, and I'm about to go try again. So there are ways to and the power of, even though what I do is probably slightly.
Instead of making fun of the mistakes that men make, why don't you see in the traditional relationship where women were homemakers, stayed home with the children, they were in charge of the social arena, which is a third of the pie. You have the commercial, political, and social arena. They were in charge of all of that, and they'd make sure that the other 2 domains were held in equilibrium, and the invisible hand guiding them.
Slightly not respectable in the minds of the people who are in this room, and that I am crafting narratives out of pretty technical stuff and simplifying in places. And I have a feeling that half the room, if they would say, he did an okay job of explaining the collateralized debt obligation, but he missed this over here. And I'm sure that I am not a finance specialist. I happen to have worked on Wall Street for a few years and understood that that there are a lot of questions that always need to be asked. You have to get underneath the jargon. Yeah. And when you get underneath the jargon, stuff ceases to be all that complicated. But it is amazing the power of the narrative to affect the way people think about all of this.
So do you think we should apply those principles to us? Because we have stories to tell. And we have recommendations to make, and we have policies advised, but sometimes the message doesn't come across very well.
Well, no, the thing is you have to understand all of their vocabulary. And it's just like learning a new language. I mean, I learned French, then Spanish when I was in my mid-20s, so not as a child. And it's just like learning a new language, particularly as an adult. Okay, here's the verb conjugation, here's the vocabulary, here's how you put the sentence together, and voila, that's how they talk about it. And once you understand it, no mystery.
Sometimes public opinions don't see that, number one, we've changed, number two, we might be advising for the better rather than for the worse.
It's funny, it's that this is probably true of every arena of ambition, that it develops a language of its own.
But see, these people, as he pointed out, these people that are brought into the IMF and World Bank They're nosers. They're yes people, and they've been brought in because they are. And somebody who will just drink excuse me, the Kool-Aid that academia has produced. I remember, like in my stats class, first I was like, wait a second, I am sorry, but I'm going to pay this much money for a course. I want somebody who speaks proper English. The guy's Indian accent was so thick you couldn't understand a freaking word. Other thing that I learned was, you can just you can manipulate this shit to make it say anything you want. I am a statistician. I am very pro stats. I mean, I use it all the time. I use graphs all the time. I'm a graphist. All over the place, all the time. I'm making and poring over graphs and looking at trends and comparing trends of different, what one would think are unrelated arenas, but they're not. So, I'm definitely pro, but I learned in my 101 class, I'm like, oh, you guys, you experts, I got your number. Same can of worms with accounting 101. And also, there are two things I think I'd rather shoot myself in the head than become an accountant or a statistician. Put me on a construction crew before you ever give me one of those seat warming jobs.
In the arena, and you try to speak in some other language, you're discredited. That if you don't use the jargon you've been handed.
Very true.
So I have a privileged position because I'm not in the arena. I come in as an interloper, and I can speak about these things in looser terms. But if you tried to do it, they'd say you were an idiot. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
I think it happened to me several times, including in this institution.
Yes, I'm sure that. So
at the beginning.
So if you try to communicate with people who know nothing whatsoever about finance.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time with so many of these PhDs, particularly the low, come up, cashier, they're coming to order their lunch, and they get an elevator speech about what's wrong with the IMF and the World Bank during their spring meetings. I get a variety of reactions from all of these PhDs with their heads up their asses, and the ESQs are no different. Either they're bewildered, like I'm just ordering my lunch, or they're offended and pissed off because they know I'm right, and like, what are you doing here, minimum wage person? Like I'm important. I got a 6-figure salary and you're here this minimum wage, and that's why I'm there to humiliate and put me at the bottom of the economic food chain. So I'm a nobody. I am a minimum wage cashier, but I keep on pointing out, excuse me, Joe Kennedy Sr. apparently didn't lose his shirt and the entire family fortune in the crash of 29 because he listened to a shoe shine boy on Wall Street. Huh. So how do you like them apples? So yeah, they're like bewildered, pissed off, or God, yeah. Holy shit, yeah. Like Joe Senior going, we're coming down. We're coming down. If even the cashier sees through the smokes and mirrors, we're up a creek without a paddle.
In a way they will understand. It would cost you with the people who you have to deal with every day. Whereas I don't have that, what you should do, instead of trying to be more like me in the way you communicate with others, you should just create more of me. You should let people in who can do it. And so building kind of trust with storytellers is a very good idea.
Yeah, they had just ousted somebody who was doing that. Ooh, that's not going to get down too good. This was whole, like letting in somebody like Michael Lewis, and this is definitely during the Christine Lagarde era. You can see how things changed after Kristalina stepped in. But anyway, yeah, this is all a facade. They're gonna let somebody like Michael Lewis on a podium, but work in there and actually have some power in there and do something and kick some butt over at HR to start. And then with the secretary pool, yeah, those ladies. Nancy Pelosi is afraid of me.
And there are plenty of storytellers. I mean, why aren't there great? There are some, but podcasts, coming out of the IMF, done by people who don't work for the IMF, or why isn't there a great Wall Street TV show? There is this market inefficiency that I've made a career out of. Right, I made a living out of selling millions of books to people who want to read about this sector, because nobody else is addressing them in a way that they are engaged by. So there are plenty of people who could do the job. They just need to be kind of invited to do the job, I think. I was an exception because I happened to work in the place for a little while, so I had a pass, I had a way in. But if you're, I don't know, Ira Glass at This American Life, or Malcolm Gladwell, or one of these...
He was there long enough time to understand the basic functionings, the different instruments, the different actors, the morals or lack of, etc., just like Jeffrey Epstein, and just like I did. I mean, I was, 2.5 years in the markets. I was there from 85, the end of 87. I was there for the 87 collapse. I learned a lot. Well, and then I was married to a currency trader, crash and burn banker. So that, let's just say I'm watching from the sidelines, but close eye, front seat, real front seat.
I mean, there's people out there who can do one.
Pick up the fallout when it happens.
Wonderful storytellers. If they were admitted into this realm, they'd work magic with public understanding. So that's if I were in your shoes, that's what I would do. I'd start calling up people who I recognize as gifted storytellers and say, this may seem too complicated for you to understand. It's not. Come move in for 6 months and just see how it all works.
So when we advocate inclusive growth, when we push for trade and recognize that trade has had huge benefits and some downside to it, and already I'm in the jargon, because downside, what does it mean to people? Right? I know, I've been contaminated, big way.
But it's just, it's a shorthand. You're speaking to people in the room who know exactly what you mean.
That's
right. So why?
So do you think that you could make a story out of that? I'm not suggesting to.
The stories.
One of the issues is the organizers, all of the secretarial pool, the administrative staff, the events coordinators, HR, those are the ones who organize these events, and they don't understand any of this shit. They don't even care. They think their job is to kiss ass to the PhDs. They think, oh, they got a PhD. They know exactly what they're talking about. It's just like the people on the passengers of the Titanic with the captain. He's at the helm. He knows what he's doing. We're good. So my favorite is when they're criticizing Prince Andrew of how much money he spent to go to Davos and all of that, how much that cost. I said, that's not Prince Andrew's fault. That's the organizers of that conference, and you all should be investigating all of that shit. They're pulling it all of the time. They are wasting money. I keep on telling everybody, the day that everybody finds out how much is being spent on all of this bullshit, they're going to be furious. Furious. You think I'm mad? Whoa. Calm, cool, and collected compared to that shit.
That need to be told are the stories about inequality right now. There are two kinds of stories that seem to me to be wet, rich themes that need to be addressed and addressed very creatively. One is the inequality in the world, and two is trust.
Yeah.
And the lack of trust. I tried to do this with this book. I wrote Flashback.
Inequality in the world. I mean, the people at the IMF and the World Bank, there are amongst the most elitist, entitled. Just yesterday, day before, was we had all of the spring meeting people, and I mean, the waiters at the end of the week are just by the end of it going, I'd love to kill those people. And the World Bank, I mean, just entitled, rude, I'm over here, over disrespectful. These people should be ashamed of themselves. Absolutely ashamed of themselves. They're not. It makes them feel important. All this money is being thrown at them to make them feel important and I'm rich and famous, so I'm important in this world. Well, how does that make them important? They're economists. They should be understanding that, like, this bullshit.
I mean, what happens? I wrote a whole book and about the rigging of the American stock market, and in the most extraordinary financial things have been done. But what interested me was someone on Wall Street was trustworthy and was going to insist on being trustworthy and was going to insist on introducing trust as the main subject and the effect that had on the environment around him, which is incredible because the whole system depends on trust, and we've kind of forgotten that. But that and this idea of your idea of inclusive growth, I think that's another way of saying how do you address the inequality in the world and make the problems it gives rise to real. Off the top of my head, do I have a way of?
First, people have to start caring about other people, and instead of just accumulation of wealth, status, and then they ease their conscience with charity work or bullshit. I mean, Jennifer Welch is the one that I'm particularly pointing at the moment. She's with the I Had It podcasters. It's IHIP, but she's from Oklahoma City, and always trashing the Bible Belt. And her sidekick is Pumps. Pumps was an evangelical Christian, brought up that way, and stopped drinking and passing out the Kool-Aid, and recognizes how dysfunctional all of this, mega church stuff is, and how hypocritical they are. But now Jennifer, which is interesting, and I've watched because that's interesting, but also this is the woke liberals, suburban, stupid, dumb blondes, of the Midwest. But Jennifer, her husband's retiring, and they've moved to Manhattan, and now she's hanging out with John Lemon, and they're aligned and building their coalition to attack the Republicans. And I'm just like, oh, great. And I mean, I'm just like, so anyway, I keep on using her as an example. See, woke liberals run by suburban housewives is not dead. And they're easing their conscience at my expense and the country's expense. I'm being offered up as a sacrificial lamb by these women to atone for their sins instead of charity work.
Addressing that? No. But
we can think about it.
Absolutely. Okay. Could be done. Could be done.
Okay.
Could be done. It's interesting to me that you obviously feel some frustration with your ability to communicate.
Yeah.
Why? Where does that come from?
Well, I tell you, the frustration we have is we have been repeating some messages lately about growth, about inclusiveness, about inequality. But I think that we could come across in a much louder, more efficient way. And we always ask ourselves, do we have the traction?
Right.
Because we deal with finance ministers, we deal with governors of central banks who themselves are hostage to their own government first and public opinion and the next election.
Right.
So we are, looking at who are the interlocutors, who will make the difference at the end of the day, which is why I think we need to tell that story beyond them as well, and outreach to public opinion and to explain, what the positive outcome, what the benefits there could be in doing this, that, or the other.
Yeah, see, this is what all of my research is going into that. In fact, behind me, this is the Tartarian Empire, but it is the what happened with the central banks in the rise to power. Well, this was the Prussian, the Germans, and the fall of the Ottoman, the Tartarian Empire. and the concentration of wealth that was going on with the industrialists, World War I, World War II, and the families in Europe, England, the industrialist families, and the United States that were all complicit to that. And these families, I mean, Tim Mellon, I want some answers. Now, Tim Mellon, this is Andrew Mellon. He was the Treasury Secretary in events leading up to the crash of 29 and was blamed for that. Marianne Seigert's great-great-great-grandfather was in Vienna. And that when that and was blamed at that, he was the head of the Treasury Department there under Kaiser Wilhelm. So see history repeating itself. And I've been looking at exactly how that has happened and how it is, you know, not only being done, but the outcome on all sorts of different arenas. But I'm a persona non grata.
Without losing sight that there are, finance ministers, governors of central banks are our natural interlocutors, and we work with them, and they implement the policies, and they design the new laws, and all the rest of it. But I think that we have to go as well, in order to help them do their job. We have to go beyond that.
If you stand up and give a speech where you unload your heart on the world, when you say, this is where I see the problems in the world, and this is why we aren't addressing them properly. I've read some of your speeches, and you've done some of this. Are you surprised by the response or disappointed by the response? Do you feel like you're not listened to and you need to find another way to communicate? Or do you feel like there's just natural constraint in the job and there's only so much you can do?
I think the loudspeaker is not big enough.
You don't have a big enough megaphone.
No, I want to...
Yeah, just get more voices of our opinion, and everything's going to be fine, without realizing, no, you're in a cesspool, you're in a hornet's nest of social climbing honeypots from all over the world coming to live their dreams of fame and fortune in the United States. Okay, instead of a deal as a rapper singer, they get a PhD. It's a different kind of fame and fortune, and your groupies are a little bit different, but it's the same adrenaline high and the same dynamics.
That you continue to help us, because I think you would be fantastic. As part of our series here, do you mind if I ask you 3 questions that I will ask everybody who attends this program?
Sure.
Okay. So I have to be guided by the team here. If you had the choice today of being professionally somebody completely different, who would you be?
Steph Curry. He's the shooting guard for the Golden State Warriors. But other than, that would be the first thing.
Really?
I was like, who the frick is that?
Less realistically?
Yeah.
No. So I had, you go back in your life and you think, what paths might I have gone? So I might have become an art historian if there was a big market for art historians. That would have been the first thing that happened. When that didn't happen, if I had absolutely no literary ability, I would be a financier. I would still be on Wall Street.
Really?
It was throwing huge sums of money. The people I told at Solomon Brothers that I was leaving to become a writer, they weren't worried I was going to write about what I was going to write about them. They were worried about my sanity. They thought you're walking out of basically a life of being a rich person to do that. But I probably would have despaired of my ability to do anything productive.
Can you imagine if they thought that was insane? I left it to go and pack my bags and to learn French to become an au pair and then become a trad wife and stay-at-home mom? Can you imagine how insane I am? According to these.
I've never been useful. And if you're not useful and you don't know very much, the only place you can really get rich is Wall Street. And so that's almost certainly what I would have ended up doing.
Wait a second, Madison Avenue is amongst that as well.
Just stayed there and felt guilty about it.
Or Fashion Runway.
So God knows where that would have led.
Well, I'm so glad you went.
So those are the only 2 realistic paths. And thank God that I've been able to do something other than that.
Okay, if you had a magic stick, who would you like most to meet, whom you haven't met?
Who I like most to meet who I haven't met. It's funny. I've not got to the point where I've met. There are not many people I haven't met. I will tell you if I had a magic wand, but a magic stick is a better way of putting it.
It's all about networking. He's met all of these people, and what has everybody accomplished? All you leaders, managers, bigwigs, with all of these titles and information and knowledge. What are you accomplishing? I keep on saying, if everybody could harness all the hot air coming out of all of these people, we would solve the energy crisis. You goes, bye-bye, bye-bye. Bye-bye problems with, lines at the gas tanks.
If I had a magic stick, it makes me feel like Gandalf. So if I had a magic stick, and there's someone I've long wanted to write about, and I've not been able to get to, is Vladimir Putin. So there's no celebrities, and I've spent a lot of time with the president. So there's no one, people.
Tucker Carlson got them.
He is proven inaccessible to me. I think he's a very dangerous character. I worry that he could really do bad things in the world, and I would love a chance to lighten him up a little bit. Just see. I would love to be able to spend some time with him, and I'd love to be able to write about him. That he represents something that's kind of that's alien to me.
Tucker Carlson has gotten raked over the coals for his interview.
That feels like it might drag us back into a darker and earlier era of international affairs, and I want to understand that.
I was going to ask you who's the person you really know.
That's what we're going to get into. If people stay around, this is what we're going to get into at the end of the.
I want to meet, but I guess you've already.
No. I want to. No, but Putin, I would love to meet because so who would I never want to meet? The Grim Reaper. That's who I don't want to meet. I don't have anybody like that.
I should have put in the.
I suppose the answer would be a high-frequency trader in the court of law. When I wrote Flash Boys, I knew I was taking on a group of people who were very litigious and had huge sums of money at stake, and
we're ready for anything.
Ready for anything, and so I was a little worried about that.
Well, it's been a fantastic pleasure to actually meet you, Michael, today. So thank you very much. I'm afraid this is over.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So that takes us back to. No, I hope I was watching the video. I hope it was. Shoot. Okay. I'm not sure. Shit. We're going to go and look at the debate on the global economy shaping economic policies in the face of disruptive change.
It is, yeah.
I'd like to welcome everybody here. This panel, I am so excited about it, and frankly, I am so honored to be on this stage with this group of people. I would like to introduce them. First, sitting next to me is the President of Singapore, Tharman Shanmugaratnam.
She practiced.
For 24 hours, but he told me just to call him President Tharman or Mr. President. And then, of course, President of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, is next to him. And then, of course, the Managing Director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. Adena Friedman.
So this was the, this is not the spring meetings, this is the annual meetings 2025. But this was the first time Christine Lagarde is back on a podium at the IMF.
Of the Nasdaq, she's chair and CEO of Nasdaq, and Gordon Hanson, who is the Peter Wertheim Professor in Urban Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. This is a tremendous group of people to talk about the economy in flux around the world and how many changes there really have been over the past 6 to 12 months. And that's where I want to start. Managing Director Georgieva, I want to start with you. How much has the world economy changed over the past 6 to 12 months?
This is an excellent question. Vis-a-vis 12 months ago, it has gotten worse. But vis-a-vis 6 months ago, it has gotten better. So what is our story? Our story is when we were here in April, there was a big trade shock and tremendous uncertainty of what the impact may be. Our fear at that time was that there could be...
The trade shock, if anybody doesn't realize, is Trump and the tariffs and his...
contraction of growth, and that was reflected in our projections. Since then, what we witness is the world economy has been remarkably resilient. And when you look at the reasons for this resilience...
Okay, so yeah, resilience means adaptable. But that an indication that we don't have free market forces at work. That's an indication that there's protectionism going on. See, this is one of my big, these are supposed to be economic institutions about promoting free market capitalism, but they're not.
Two stand up. One, countries over the last decades have built strong fundamentals, good policies, strong institutions, and this is particularly applicable to a big part of the emerging market world. Good policies pay off. Two, the private sector, also over these last decades, has gradually moved forward for a bigger role in the economy, and private sector is more agile. And then we had the so far nice surprise that countries decided not to retaliate in their vast majority when hit by tariffs. So with only two exceptions, we have 191 members. The US and 2 plus 2, China, in the beginning Canada, retaliated. Everybody else said, thank you, but no thank you. We don't want a trade war. We prefer to retain trade as an engine for growth. Now, resilience so far, but I want to be straight with this audience. I don't know whether this resilience has been fully tested. And I can think of 3 big risks. If they materialize, there will be trouble. Risk number 1, maybe this restraint on trade is not going to last. We see, for example, Chinese goods that were to come to the United States being redirected to Asia, to Europe. Would that be managed still with patience, or there could be a down spiral of tariffs? 2, financial conditions. They're wonderful. That's actually another reason for resilience. There is access to money, there is access to capital, but that has led to stretched valuations, especially in AI investments. Huge enthusiasm, AI would lift up productivity, but what if it doesn't? That could lead to a shock. And the third big risk, as always, is the unknown. We learned over the last years since COVID, think of the unthinkable. I don't know what the next shock is going to be. I don't know when it is going to come, but I'm pretty confident there would be one. And then we are tested.
There's a lot to unpack there. President Tharman, I want to go to you just to talk about what your experience has been as the head of an open economy in Southeast Asia during this period in terms of what you've observed and how much has changed in terms of trade flows and the consistency that people feel like there is from policy.
Well, I think this is a setback. It's a setback for Asia as a whole. It's a setback for Southeast Asian nations. And we've got to start thinking about how we can make it an opportunity. The setback is clear. If you look at most Asian countries outside China, we know what the problems China is facing, but look at it outside China. They're facing a double whammy. There's the US tariffs on the one hand, which will itself have a fairly significant impact. There's also the diversion of Chinese exports from the US to other Asian countries and to Europe, which Kristalina just mentioned. And then there are 2 other, I would say, underlying forces, which are also reducing the tailwinds that were in favor of growth in Asia. One underlying force didn't start with the US tariffs, but is now picking up steam, is the onshoring of investments into both the US as well as into China. China is also onshoring investments and going for more self-sufficiency. And a second underlying challenge, I would say, is that a lot of Asia's growth rested on a US-China trade corridor. And as that corridor thins, as it thins out, we've really got to find a substitute for it. This is where I come to the opportunity. If the US is going to reconfigure trade, we've got to reconfigure trade as well. We've got agency. The middle powers and the smaller nations of the world have agency. Just think of what's possible. The CPTPP, the EU, the GCC, ASEAN, they're not small trading arrangements, by the way. If the CPTPP and the EU start collaborating with each other, that's about 42% of world trade. If ASEAN and EU start collaborating with each other, that's more than a third of world trade. So if you want to reconfigure world trade, let's reconfigure world trade. Let's go for a new arrangement that will allow developing countries in Asia to continue to rise up that ladder of value added. Trading first within each other, within ASEAN, within Asia, but very importantly, across the world. And this is a blessing of the US tariffs. It's spurring regional integration and it's spurring bridges between regions. So I think we will end up, after a period of some difficulty and some adjustment, with a new resilience. And we've got to work towards it. Let's work towards this new resilience.
Madame Lagarde.
A new resilience. Let's work towards this new resilience coming from the Middle East. So this is where you're going to be looking for the paradigm shift. let's see how that paradigm shift plays out.
You're a policymaker. You've been at the helm of the ECB for almost 6 years. How difficult is it to understand things like inflation, like economic strength, when you have the dual shocks of the idea of tariffs on the one hand, but also exports from China coming into Europe and actually suppressing price growth? How do you weigh all of this?
Well, and don't forget as well the unjustifiable war of Russia against Ukraine, which is at the doorstep of Europe. So first of all, it's really nice to be back here. Last time I was here, I think it was my farewell party. So being back here is really, really nice. Let me say, I'm going to follow up on where Kristalina left it, because my conclusion is that the worst is not always certain. And if I may say, we've been surprised to the upside. A year ago, step forward today, we had anticipated retaliation tit for tat. Europe didn't do any of that. As a result, the expected inflation contributor did not participate in the process. On the exchange rate front, we expected euro to depreciate and the dollar to appreciate. What did we see? Exactly the opposite. So it was no imported inflation as a result. And on the third point,
Oh, okay, but why? Why did things not happen as you expected them? Market manipulation? Why? Nobody asks that question.
uncertainty, we had uncertainty, granted, but eventually this driver was not as bad as we had anticipated. So because of all that, our monetary policy was not confronted to the traditional trade-off between stalling growth and rising inflation, number one. Number two, the risk to growth and inflation eventually narrowed. And
okay, growth, always, the only thing they look at growth, GDP, GNP. And we've seen, as I explained, with the whole thing with the GDP, move the women into the workplace, this transforms the jobs, and we transform it to taxable income. Now, this gets in, my research into going back into history, centuries and centuries, and in fact, everybody's problems with the Masonic lodges, and that group of people, which actually were artisan groups that grew up, and guilds, in order to, the precursor to a union, if you will. And there was some barter system within that, and I think that was the pushback against these Masonic groups, and kind of why they went underground, and then you get this secret society that developed. Because it was just the governments and authorities were like, wait a second, if you barter everything, then we can't tax it.
we're far more balanced. And as a result of that, we have, and that impacts the tools that we're using, in other words, models, we had to navigate a far more difficult situation where a lot of what was happening sort of in the course of normal business, which was not normal at all. We had to face war, we had to face tariff, we had to face, I would say, accelerated greed as a result of the impact of new technologies and social media, and we had to face hubris in quantities that we could not anticipate. And
yeah, social media, I don't think is given the importance that it merits, because it's kind of one of these, self-feeding animals. It wants lots, and what keeps it, this is a cash, right now the floodgates are open of cash and money going into these industries, and everybody can start a podcast and you make lots and lots of money. So there's this conflict of interest. Of course, they're gonna drink and sell Kool-Aid if that's Kool-Aid is making them rich.
And that certainly impaired our capacity to rely extensively on models and encouraged us to use more judgment. Bottom line, we are currently, at least in the euro area, at 2% inflation, which was our medium-term goal. We are at 2% interest rates. It's a surprising coincidence, but we consider that where we are today, we are in a good...
2% interest rates. This is the low interest rates, the Fed fund rate. This is just advantageous for the stock markets, for the speculators, the hedge fund guys. This makes capital cheap so they can go to the casino. But If you want to put your money in a savings account, you get nothing. Go to your bank. Find out how much savings accounts. Not if you have to put $50,000 down, $20,000. I'm talking about a straight savings account. Excuse me. How much is that paying? You have no incentive to save to buy something. No, you're going to put your money into a mutual fund, your retirement fund, whatever, hand it over in some way, shape, or form into the stock market or real estate market, but you're speculating and you're not going to, and then you're going to get in debt because you can't stop spending. And the debt that you pay on a credit card, this is usury. The mafia is go to prison for this shit.
And we are well positioned to face future shocks. And future shocks there will be. Both Kristalina and Tharman said it. I completely agree with that. We will be facing shocks. In what direction? How do we adjust our policies in order to deal with it? What kind of regulatory framework we have in order to reduce the financial instability risks that abound as a result of new technologies breaking through into the financial system? It will be incumbent upon us, advanced economies, emerging economies, low-income countries, to agree on what will be the best way to cooperate in order to maintain financial stability, price stability, while helping with the development of growth, which hopefully will be inclusive and sustainable.
There's a lot to unpack there, too. Several panelists have been talking.
Growth, which will hopefully be inclusive and sustainable. Those are important words. So inclusive for who? One of the things that came out, I saw in the release of the Epstein files, the first batch, another batch has come out, was that basically the plan, this is why I also keep, cute young things, and we like them young, Jeffrey Epstein types around, because the elderly, we have a growing population of elderly because they were not reproducing enough. Policymakers are well aware of this. So one of the solutions, we just exterminate the elderly. When they're no longer useful, extermination. Hell, with the cannibalism going on, that could also be a solution. There's a movie about that. Really gross. They're giving these people, like, egg is too expensive for the normal person. They're giving these like protein bar type of things to eat, and that's all they eat. And lo and behold, at the end of the film, you find out that that's where all the food is being produced for the people that are disappearing. Yeah, not science fiction.
Talking about,
I'm like, this is why there's such discrimination against the old people and the old ladies like me, and they want to shut me up. And with age comes wisdom. You've seen a lot of shit. You're like, oh no! I know how you guys lace your Kool-Aid. I'm not drinking that shit. I'm not passing it out. When a snot-nosed brat comes in and goes, here, give me a platter.
About the technological backdrop, and Adena, you've been watching this as head of the Nasdaq in terms of just how much private company innovation has dominated what we've seen in terms of the upside surprise that Madame Lagarde was talking about. How sustainable do you see this? Is there a disconnect here between the uncertainty in the broader economic backdrop and the public sector and the real dynamism that we're seeing and elevated valuations in the private sector, particularly having to do with tech?
I actually would say that I think that investors have done a good job of synthesizing everything we've been talking about here and demonstrating it in the markets and how they're engaging with the markets. So, on the back of COVID and in the aftermath of COVID, with a very changing monetary policy and a very fast changing monetary policy to tighten monetary policy, investors kind of took a step back and took a very risk-off stance. And we saw that in terms of not as many IPOs coming to market, and some market, frankly, some market,
Nasdaq. I'm going to jump over this one because it's blah, 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 blah. If you really want to listen, go ahead and listen. We'll listen a little bit. Harvard Kennedy School professor, Gordon Hanson. Because I have Valhalla to get into.
Most important policymakers when it comes to global trade policy are the Supreme Court justices of the United States. Sometime probably after hearing arguments about the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, probably that will happen in early November, in January in all likelihood, they will decide whether the President of the United States has free rein to set tariffs or whether big changes in tariff policy across the board have to go through the US Congress. If we're in that first world, then I think the incentives to retaliate fundamentally change. The managing director was spot on in saying that the limited economic consequences we've seen from the trade war so far are grounded in the absence of retaliation. But that retaliation is in part because you don't know which United States you're taking on. And we're going to learn that quite soon. Once that gets resolved, then I think countries are going to be choosing between the world that President Tharman laid out, in which the EU, parts of Asia, Australia, Canada come together and say, we want civilized trade relationships, come join us and we can play by a fixed set of rules. And then we'll have kind of trade barbarity going on in the rest of the world in which you got to take on the United States. The United States is going to do one thing one day and it's going to do another thing the next day. But if we're in a different world, if the President of the United States is constrained, then that pressure for retaliation looks quite different. And we're more in a world that's like what happened with anti-dumping policies and retaliation against anti-dumping. It's about specific industries, it's bilateral conflicts at different moments in time, and the things that we can manage that don't throw us into all-out trade war.
Does anyone want to respond? Just want to throw this out there because I see a lot of people writing.
I'm delighted to pick up on your 2 points because I think it describes exactly the policy of the European Union. The two things that are happening that have been awoken, if you will, by the uncertainty of which administration we're dealing with. Number one, there's been significant public investment and a drive towards beefing up defense in particular at both public and private level. So that's a boost that is coming from investment and development of activity. And the second one, which is obvious.
Military spending.
It's an acceleration of the negotiations that were underway at a slow, laborious way with quite a lot of partners, specifically in Eastern Asia, but other countries of the world as well. So our trade secretary in Europe is actively engaged in exactly that movement, just in case.
Well, I wonder, President Tharman, how much you see already people rearranging versus actually waiting to see about the Supreme Court case to decide how much to move away from a US-driven model.
I think the unstated assumption in China and most Asian countries is there will be continued unpredictability. There has been a step change in the whole regime of global trade. So regardless of how the Supreme Court rules on this or that, you're now in a more unpredictable situation, and it'll be wise to start building alternatively, building new resilience, building new trade connections, building new investment connections, investing together.
Important what you're going to listen to next after this. Listen.
To tackle the challenges of the global commons, even if it doesn't include the US for now. I think they'll eventually come back, but even if it doesn't include the US for now, we've got to press ahead. So there is, I think, an unstated assumption that we are facing a more unpredictable situation with the largest economy in the world, and we can't wait to see what happens. We've got to start making alternative plans. And in the meantime, keep our relations with the US as best as we can. Keep our relations with the US. It's still a major market. It's got the most innovative companies in the world. Keep our relations with them.
So my experience over the last almost a year is the following. I lived through a revolution when the former Soviet bloc collapsed and countries moved from non-market to market economies. And I can say that the transformation that we are observing is quite significant. So I'm not sure we will go back to the world we came from of fairly orderly multilateralism. But it doesn't mean that we would be moving forward in a world that is not based on international cooperation, just because we are bound to cooperate in different configurations in a different manner than before. Any place I travel in regions, I hear the same message. You, IMF, help us to think through trade integration, financial integration. We are talking here about trade, but there are also capital markets, there are financial...
Help us to do our plans. Help us to do our plans. Okay? Note that.
You know, the EU is, of course, much ahead of everybody else. And that's, as President Tharman said, this move towards collaboration within regions. I was in the Gulf Cooperation Council, is moving very rapidly in trade integration and is talking very seriously about financial integration. The same is in ASEAN. Central Asian countries, they used to be not too comfortable working together. They're now looking for opportunities to work together. So that is going to happen. And then these groupings, then they would collaborate across borders. The EU is very active in reaching out. And some of these relations would be more stable and some would be less stable. Therefore, we have to get accustomed to some inefficiency in the way we cooperate, but cooperate we will. And my last point on this, where we are headed, is this notion of uncertainty. I actually think that we are now in an era in which uncertainty is the new normal. We are not going to have the comfort of predicting, 5 years ahead what is going to happen. And you see a little bit, and I would be interested in Christine.
This is supposed to be a world leader. Can't predict. You can't predict because the world is controlled by all of these unpredictable, crazy people. And we're just take it as is. I know somebody said that to me just yesterday. I mean, I'm like, ugh, they're coming. Normally, we don't have anybody coming in on Saturday. I go into work. I told there was an event. I told the owner, shit, I gotta send an email. We don't have this. We don't have that. No. The other girl said, no, everything's ordered. No, let's see. Okay, we have ice cream, but we don't have chocolate. Like the passion fruit. The passion fruit is good, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. So anyway, I'm like, no, we don't have that. We don't have that. We don't have that. We don't have that. We ran out of donuts. We don't have that. We don't have that. We don't have Let me tell you what we do have. And this guy was just like, tranquilo, tranquilo. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I've had it. When I was growing up, this country was tops in customer service and efficiency. I mean, nobody could touch us. We were admired. Now, we were admired and but feared, and now we're just hated and mocked. And people are coming to our country and colluding. I'm sorry, this is admission to colluding to the paradigm, what we're going to see next with Valhalla.
Things beyond that. You see a little bit of this impact of uncertainty on the trajectory of gold and also on longer-term yields. People are saying, okay, you want me to lend you money for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, God knows what will be then, you need to pay me more. So that, I think, is something that policymakers here may not be comfortable with because certainty is preferable. But I think we should embrace it and say, hey, that opens up more opportunities because there are multiple combinations of relations that could be winning relations.
Yeah, I mean, we operate markets in Europe as well, and I would say that what's happened over the last year has been an enormous catalyst for Europe to come together and think differently about what can be in terms of financial cooperation. And bringing the savings and investment union construct is it's a new energy around how do we actually bring Europe closer together? How do we unlock the potential of this enormous economy? And what I found is, as you go around the world, you're hearing that in other parts of the world too. We provide technology to about 140 markets around the world. So we speak to the capital markets and the governments all over the world about what they're trying to do. They ask, of course, how do you create this innovation economy? And there are lots of things, I think we'll talk about that, but it's very possible. And people are thinking differently about what they're taking agency, as you said, in terms of what they can do with their own economies, how they can spur their own growth, how they can collaborate and cooperate across borders in ways that weren't before. And personally, I think in the end, that will result in a stronger world, and just a different relationship with the United States and elsewhere. But I'm an optimist, so I usually see this as a catalyst for us to think differently about innovation, to think differently about tax policies and economic policies and equity ownership and all those things that kind of frankly spur growth in a country and drive investment also, by the way, that can strengthen countries.
Happy to follow up on that because it's nice to be praised by non-Europeans, so thank you. But I think there is a momentum, you're right, in two directions. The first one is at home. We have an internal market, which is the largest economic zone in the world, still at the moment, but we have inflicted upon ourselves one border after one barrier, one license requirements after another hurdle that entrepreneurs and corporates have to jump over. I think the momentum is here to now reduce as much as possible of those internal barriers, and the excellent study produced by the IMF, which indicates that on goods, it's as if we had a 40% tariff, and on services, as if we had 110% tariffs, is, a big kick in the butt to say, get on with it, remove that 40%, remove that 110%, and don't complain about, your status. The second direction we are heading into, and as often with Europe, it goes one step at a time, and there is no big bang, so to speak, is on the capital market union, where we really want to be attractive to non-European capital, number one, so investors can come over, and we want to make sure that the savings that are currently massively into deposits, they're
here in the United States, 300 billion.
Everybody's trying to attract foreign investment. I'm like, you know what? Have a stable economy, courts where people can't, con artists can't shaft you with your money, extort you of your money, and you have no recourse under the law, and you're sitting there and going, next time, buyer beware. That's what you need to concentrate on.
billion of those of yours European savings are right here.
Yep. So we want to say, you don't have to travel the Atlantic. You can just stay here at home and generate a good yield. One last point, because Kristalina prompted me on that. Yes, the long-term yields have behaved in a quite surprising way, and they have gone up, and it's certainly attributable to a risk premium that is expected and required by the investors. But it's particularly true in the 30 years, not so much in the 10 years, and it's not as heavy as we had feared in the first place. It's come down a bit, and I think that the risk premium requested is now much more reasonable by all standards.
And we're going to get into the fiscal deficit and how that changes and gives a very EM tinge to some DM. But Professor Hanson, I'd love to get your take from China's perspective in sort of how much differently they're approaching this new landscape and how that kind of changes things in ways that people might not fully appreciate.
So we're in the second big phase of China's economic growth since it joined the global community of trading nations in the 1980s and really in the 1990s. And that first phase was a pretty mechanical one. It was China making good on its latent comparative advantage in manufacturing, reallocating labor from farms to factories, and undergoing a process of urbanization that had been staunched by the Maoist policies of central planning that were in effect for 30 years. That had played itself out by around 2010. And now what we're going through is this new phase of Chinese growth, which isn't driven towards that natural process of comparative advantage. It's driven by the state deciding where China should go and enlisting competition among companies and competition among regional policymakers to figure all of that out. That first epoch, kind of China Shock 1, was market forces were stronger and the government was neutral to some extent when it came to specific industries. Now the government is much less neutral. What China wants to be in command of are quality productive sectors. And what's different about this time around is, whereas last time, what you're really talking about is engineering redistribution inside countries. The US went from producing manufacturing to producing intellectual property. Now what we're really talking about is the potential redistribution of technology frontier industries from one set of places to China. That makes the stakes of what we're living through very high. But I don't want to be the voice of gravity on this panel. There are reasons for optimism, and that is because there are self-regulating mechanisms here, and that is what China is doing is extraordinarily expensive. And you can't make those sorts of investments forever unless you're going to generate a self-reinforcing process of productivity growth, and we're not there yet.
Well, Managing Director, this goes to the question of the resilience of developing markets and developed markets to spend in order to be in this race, because right now these are all highly capital-intensive endeavors. So how limited are developed markets at a time when the fiscal deficit is so large?
So what we are seeing is very interesting. Many emerging markets and even some low-income countries have gotten the lesson of history that if you have strong institutions, you can withstand shocks better. We did a study and it shows that those emerging markets where they made the investment in strong institutions and good policies, if a shock is to come, would have half a percentage up to 1 percentage point higher growth, and they would have 0.6% lower inflation because they have these fundamentals right. Some of this, they have created independent central banks, they have created fiscal councils, some of them have put fiscal rules in place, they built reserves to protect themselves, and this is not a small part of emerging markets. So, in a way, what...
You want the central banks in order to, control when the system reaches a equilibrium, instead of letting market forces take their course and free trade, and if you're going to go bust, you're going to go bust. Here's a protectionism, and you're going to protect that concentration of wealth and the oligarchs.
I fear is that now we see some of the advanced economies being a bit more leisurely. Well, here in this country, there are discussions around independence of the Fed. That is something emerging markets learned. Don't touch, let them do their job. We are safer when we have it. We have to recognize that there are vulnerable middle-income countries that have not done this hard work. They haven't built foundation for growth. They haven't built reserves. When a shock comes, they're in trouble. And then there are vulnerable countries because of their location on this planet and their vulnerability to climate shocks. They can see 200% of GDP lost just by one day of hurricane. And that is a different, not that they don't want to be resilient, but they are in a very difficult position. And then we have low-income countries, fragile states. So when you look at the world, what you see is I'll give you a number. 100 poorer countries, middle-income and poor countries, hold somewhere between 3 and 5% of global reserves. 10 countries hold 2/3 plus of global reserves. And this is where we come into play. The IMF, the World Bank, we are there to provide extra layer of resilience. And yet I think it would be much better if we are more proactive in creating opportunities.
All of the few countries holding all of these reserves, this is waste management, and crisis management is the name of the game.
Opportunities, creating jobs, building a bridge between the capital in the north that is now here to the labor in, say, in Africa, where there are young people eager to have a job. So as a world, where I'm
Africa, there are young people eager to have a job, but not in the US. I mean, it's like this perspective towards this global economy. Yeah. This is why everybody hates the globalist.
concerned about the current developments is that we are losing sight of some of the big, from a humane standpoint, big questions. How do we have a world that is converging? It used to be that the idea was, and trade was the transmission line for this convergence, that you are poor, then you do labor-intensive stuff, then you get richer, then expand in manufacturing, and you go up like this. And now what?
Because it's built on this fantasy of the poor people coming to this country, the immigrants. I remember I was in Cuba, they was like, oh, we love America, we want to go to America. It's like, you're not coming to El Dorado. Yeah, there's poverty here. The economic model of exploitation, income inequality, and easing one's conscience by charity work has been recognized by the development community to be unsustainable and undemocratic and producing all sorts of human rights violations since the 60s and 70s. Yet that's why they bring yes women like Kristalina into the system. So, she's smart enough to learn the jargon and the rhetoric and drink and pass out Kool-Aid, but she doesn't really understand, or I think it's mainly she doesn't want to, scratch beneath the surface. This whole thing about, poverty is only in the low income and middle income countries. And this is another nomer of the international development community to make sense of the jargon.
What is going to be compensatory for the loss of this transmission line? And Tharman, I would urge us, when we think about configurations for the future, to also think about this, because it is morally right, but also because it is in our own self-interest. If we have a diverging world, it would be a more insecure world for all of us.
Can I add just one word? Yeah. Because there's a great study that you did at the IMF, which shows as well that trade is conducive to innovation. If we put a brake on trade, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to innovation. And
trade is conducive to innovation. Well, you don't need to be rocket science to understand that. But is innovation always good? And are the people doing the trading doing so in a more moral and ethical way?
Yep, productivity is one thing that we absolutely need.
There was a lot to unpack there, and President Tharman, on the independence of the central bank point of view. How independent can a central bank get, in your experience in monetary policy and as an economist for many, many years, if the deficit gets to a certain level?
Well, I think it's there's been repeated history, repeated episodes in history of governments running up large debt.
Okay, one day. We're, I think, $39 trillion in debt, United States, public debt. Globally, I think public debt is around 100 trillion. But yet they're passing out Kool-Aid of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Deficits, and then having to find ways to finance it, either by putting pressure on central banks to lower interest rates, or to just gradually, by way of stealth inflation, making their debts cheaper to service through inflation. It's not just about one or two countries today. It's been a repeated practice in history, and it happens in countries where you've got seemingly independent central banks, as well as in countries where central banks were never independent. So it's a real risk. But I think that's it's a headline issue today. It captures a lot of attention. I think our focus really has to shift to what Kristalina was talking about. We're treading water today. We're obsessed with the short term. And if we keep treading water, we'll eventually be drinking seawater. We've got to start looking at the really big issues on the horizon. And they're not distant issues, by the way. Climate change, by the way, is not a distant issue.
Yeah, Kool-Aid, seawater.
It's about insurers today deciding that some states are uninsurable and many homeowners are uninsurable and will not be able to get their mortgages. It's coming home to roost. These are not distant issues. They're not in the air. They're on the ground, and they will affect communities. So we've got to shift our whole focus in fiscal policy and in economic strategy especially towards addressing the really big issues. Because if we don't do it, we're going to have to end up spending a lot more than we otherwise would. So even from the point of view of just fiscal prudence.
Well, if you don't do it, you're going to end up like Marie Antoinette and Louis says.
It's better to repurpose fiscal spending and repurpose revenues today rather than have to drink seawater in future. Spend more to mitigate climate change and to adapt where you really have to, particularly in Africa and some of the developing world.
Spend more, spend more, spend more. No, not necessarily spend more. Look at how you're spending and wasting money and stop waste, and also invest in projects that people want and need, and that do contribute to the the well-being of the larger community of your people. If people have jobs and political stability, economic stability, really you don't have much social unrest. And we can address the issues in educational systems, our healthcare systems, start producing societies that are healthy. Instead of trying to get them doped up, first on sugar, cocaine, opioids, shooting them, sending off war so they got, get their limbs blown off.
Today, with really what are limited allocations of resources to prevent the next pandemic or to make it much less hurtful when it comes, much less hurtful to human society. It's very sensible thinking. Spend today to help the developing world become a source of demand for the rest of the world, to grow the global middle class. Not a huge amount of money required, just a fraction of the surplus savings that today goes towards funding rich countries' fiscal deficits, which is where most of the surplus savings in the world go. Just a fraction of that, whether it's through aid money or through the World Bank and the MDBs, or by working with the private sector and adding a little bit of a public guarantee. Right? Not a huge amount of money, but the bang for the buck that comes from addressing.
Yeah, Kristalina Georgieva, you can hear her in the back. Yeah, see this guy, I don't think she's liking too much. This is, they're on different, even if they're in the same race and going towards the same finish line, they're kind of not on the same plane.
Addressing the really big issues is significant compared to the way we're just treading water today. So repurpose fiscal strategy. When Christine first took over as managing director of the IMF, and I happened to then be chair of the IMFC, I was thinking back. Portugal was such a success story. They started off in a mess. They ended up 4 years later, not 10 years later, 4 years later, as a success story. They repurposed both revenues and spending. They cut spending.
I just want to, we saw with Iceland, but if everybody, I'm going to pause here and go back to my slides for a moment. Where was it? Donuts. We did look at Portugal. This is Africa. Did I not look? I'm sure we looked at Portugal here. This is London. If I haven't looked at Portugal, I'm going to have to look back here. We definitely need to go. I was sure. Yes theory. Oops. With yes theory, we had gone to Portugal. As I say, if we haven't gotten there yet, we definitely, maybe I haven't gotten to that, but sorry about that. But, so we'll look at that, because that is definitely, not a success story at all.
Spending on education and health, and it may appear, terrible, austerity is going to lead to hardship. What happened? The educational performance caught up with the rest of Europe. The health performance caught up. They ended up cutting 6% of GDP from their primary fiscal deficits, and they became a vibrant economy. They expanded their social safety net for the poor. So they repurposed spending.
No, vibrant economy, no. It was, they expanded tourism. They really overinvested in tourism. Same can of worms with Spain. Education, yeah, you need reform, not just more kids and more money into the system. And now, Portugal is one of the examples of a failure in Europe. Southern Europe.
Away from the middle class and the upper middle class to the poor, they cut out the waste in healthcare spending, which, by the way, is a huge issue in the US and most of Europe still today. Huge issue. If you've got a back pain, they send you for imaging. If you've got a headache, they'll send you for imaging. There's just huge waste in healthcare. So think about repurposing healthcare spending, repurposing social spending in general, taking care of the poor, taking care of social mobility, and then using the resources that are freed up to address the really big issues. Think like the insurers do.
Taking care of the poor instead of making sure that you don't have poverty. Really, poverty is not necessary.
Insurers have no time for ideology. They've got their bottom line, and they're starting to price very differently climate change. But act like venture capitalists. Think like insurers, but act like venture capitalists. Take risks and invest for the future.
I think the recipe that Tharman is giving would also address the immigration problem, which is a recurrent issue the world over in advanced economies. Repurposing fiscal, investing in the right place, making sure that both from climate change, poverty, people in those low-income countries are protected, will also address immigration in a big way.
I also, just to add to that point, when you think of the power of the capital markets to also be an agent of innovation around those issues, I also think about every country has the potential to have a vibrant capital market. I mean, it's not just, you don't need to be an enormous economy to achieve that. And one of the examples that we like to point out is Sweden. It's a country with 10 million people. And it has an incredibly vibrant capital market, but it's not because the technology is great, which we're part of that, so we like it. But it's really because of decades of work by the government to establish a whole policy regime that encourages private investment. So it encourages equity ownership of the citizenship of the country with really great intentional financial literacy programs, tax policies that have low tax savings accounts, bankruptcy laws that allow people to try and try again, an innovation economy that really encourages and spurs on the,
bankruptcy laws that encourages people to try again. Now, this is something that the Americans have been criticized for a long time. Oh yeah, in the United States, you just, who cares? You just declare bankruptcy and you start a new business. Now, this was, wait a second, in traditional societies, if you keep on declaring bankruptcy, it means that you don't know how to run a business. Here, it's like, oh, I've started, I don't know how many businesses. Oh, and they've all gone bankrupt. Oh, well, that's okay. We'll give you some more money and we'll give you another one to start. Like these serial entrepreneurs, they are producing 70 to 90% failure rates. Yet they keep that low. They're the ones who get the capital all the time. You got into the little protection racket, particularly with your Turkey liberals, and the sky's the limit. Then you go up in private planes and throw the money out of the window to show how rich you are. I went into that story.
The rest of Europe has. And then the second is you've got this pension system that really invests very heavily in the domestic markets, which is also another pool of capital that comes in that also benefits citizens.
Yeah, your pension funds invest heavily in the capital markets, and you got the injection of artificial wealth in there because you're off the gold standard. And you even added Bitcoin in there. That I keep on saying, explain to me. This is one of the things that I agree with Alan Greenspan on. Explain it to me. I don't understand. It's a Ponzi scheme.
You also have these low tax savings accounts that have been incredibly effective in Sweden and in Japan in spurring equity ownership. And you have, we had, I would say in Sweden over the last 5 years, there have been 233 new issuances on the Swedish stock market, which is only second to the UK in Europe. And it's been a lot of small, medium enterprise businesses in addition to
more into the stock markets. Yeah, see where we're going?
Large caps. We've had $6 billion raised in the US, in the Swedish markets this year, which is more than double any other country in Europe. So it's a small country. And it's becoming a more diverse country too, and yet it still has this whole system that is created that allows for that innovation economy to grow. And I always say people can solve these challenges when they think long term, and then
innovation economies to grow. Whereas the goods and services you need for the necessities of the people are not being fulfilled, and your money is being diverted away from that, and then everybody's encouraged to entertain themselves, either with the social media or online or something, or traveling in tourism.
that innovation can go towards, a lot of the innovators in Sweden do go towards climate change, do try to address the bigger problems. So it's a really interesting model to look at as the IMF or as the World Bank.
Professor Hanson, I'm not saying that you're going to serve as sort of the wet blanket, but I do want a reality check about what actually is happening, and that a lot of funding has moved away from some of these things, right? I mean, it's sort of, whether it's climate change, whether it's international investments, because there is a prioritization of spending on the AI race, on some of the other technological infrastructure that is crucial for this. I mean, how much do you actually see those flows taking place that really helped places like Sweden and Portugal?
So I think one way to think about it is, in addition to maintaining macroeconomic resilience, which we've learned how to do painfully over the past 40 years, but independent central banks and well-managed fiscal accounts and what the IMF preaches to the rest of the world, we found out it wasn't easy, but we figured it out. What we've had a hard
Macroeconomic resilience. Keyword there. That means we're working with smokes and mirrors, and we're just magicians. It was very interesting. Didi's got a podcast. His take on Trump dressed up as Jesus that everybody went ballistic about in his Twitter and his tweet. Didi got a podcast, said that's not Jesus. It's the wizard, the tarot wizard card. Check it out.
harder time figuring out is how we achieve microeconomic resilience. What do I mean by that? That's the ability of an economy to move capital and labor from doing the thing you were doing to the thing now you need to do, and figuring out what that thing is. On the capital side, well-functioning capital markets are important, especially that feed into the formation of young small businesses. The labor side is where we really mess up, and we've learned this over the past several decades when we have looked at how economies have adapted to the loss of manufacturing. It could be the China trade shock, it could be technological change, it could be changes in the regulatory environment. And the issue isn't what are college-educated folks doing, it's what are folks with a secondary education, or what are folks with some college education. In the US, that would be community college. An example of how to do this well is what Costa Rica did. Costa Rica felt that its world changed in 1996 when Intel decided to go there, and all of a sudden it brought.
But wait a second, it's not just what are the college educated. Don't look at what the college, but the secondary education people are doing. But wait a second, you've got doctors, like physicians, who are going, wait a second, the plumber makes more than I do. I think I'm going to become a plumber.
Electronics manufacturing. Then a couple decades later, Intel decided, no, we're getting out of town. In the interim, Costa Rica had invested in technical training and English language training in high schools, which made its labor force resilient to that sort of shock and was able to sustain production in semiconductors, expand into medical devices, and keep the economy moving forward. Yeah. We've learned lack of resilience by what has happened in the United States. So if we think about adapting to climate.
It was an economy that became dependent on corporate, industrial, corporate interests, and not on local communities or infrastructure for those communities, or sustainable, like food supply, economic services, or public health services for that community. See?
Climate change, we think about adapting to AI, the other shocks that are coming along down the line. We need to make sure we have the investments and the institutions in place to help us redeploy labor. Otherwise, we're going to pay the price, like a similar price that we paid for the adverse adjustments to manufacturing.
Redeploy labor. See, it's about allocations of resources. You can redeploy labor. Well, why don't we start doing it, redeploying labor in the interests of the people and sustainable development, instead of the interest of the oligarchs and corporate greed. Just a thought.
Manufacturing decline.
And actually, I'd say in Costa Rica today, a lot of software businesses have teams in Costa Rica. English language is one. As you said, the technical education and the ability. It's a great skill base in a small country. It's a good example where they've been able to diversify their economy beyond that.
President Tharman, I know you've had a lot of experience, and Singapore is rated very highly in terms of AI adoption.
I speak French and Spanish, and it works against me. It makes people even more jealous of me, that I'm like, yeah, God, she's a bitch American who's like calling us out. And at least with the other Americans, they don't understand a word we're saying, but she understands everything. Get her out of here. Fire her. See, another reason why they don't like little, I'm like, yeah, I'm a spy. I'm a spy for the people in my own territory. Y'all are a spy for foreign interests, and the oligarchs.
In particular, what's sort of the recipe there that you've seen?
And you were Minister of Education for a period of your life.
What happened?
This time of my life. But just to follow on from the point that Gordon was making, why is it Sweden? Why is it Costa Rica? Why is it Singapore? Why is it Chile? Because we are countries which have very little room for complacency. We're small, always a little bit vulnerable. We have just very little room for complacency. So the reason why we go for resilience, the reason why we act early, the reason why we act with a certain robustness to prepare our workforce and to help anyone who's displaced by technology or competition, is simply that sense that we have very little room for complacency. And I think we're now in a situation, because of the AI revolution and because of the uncertainties we now face globally in world trade and investment, where large countries have to start thinking a little more like small countries, recognizing that there's very little room for complacency, and you're just so much better off if you act early. And if you act quickly to help someone who's displaced and a community that's displaced. Sweden, 90% of workers who are displaced in Sweden end up back in a job within a year. And it's not by any magic, it's not a new economic formula, it's getting going, just getting going with it. Bringing the employers in to talk to training institutions, looking at where the workers are and what pool of skills they already have, what skills are adjacent to the skills they have which they can move into, and getting them new jobs. Not anything magical, not a whole new economic formula, but a sense that you can't be complacent and you've got to move early.
Madame Lagarde, one theory.
Common sense policies, not rocket science.
Out there is that central bankers, particularly in the developed world, should err on the side of running the economy hot in order to facilitate this type of economic backdrop where people can get jobs. There is a theory that if you're going to err on one side or the other, it's better not to have a group of people that are left behind for a cycle, especially at a time of such technological transformation. What do you think about that?
Well, the purpose of monetary policy is certainly not to put people on the dole and to get them unemployed and redundant. But the purpose of...
Yes, it is. I'm proof. I'm living proof. And you all know about it. That's why you want to keep on shutting me up. I mean, these having it all feminist. See, as much as Christine Lagarde, Kristalina Georgieva, all of the spouses at the IMF, this is, you know, the shootout at the OK Corral, the showdown. And you're going to have to, because it's a competition, as Susan Barash-Shapiro explains in her book, Tripping the Prom Queen. So all these little ladies over at the IMF, whether it be the spouses or the economist or the support staff, they wanted to trip the prom queen of the white privileged American who had been offered up as a sacrificial lamb by all of the Astors and the Vanderbilts and the nouveau riche and the old guard oligarchs to atone for the sins of white privilege and you know, the Americans. I'm like, I didn't do anything. That's you guys. In fact, let's look another time at my family tree. Y'all are up a shit's creek without a paddle. I'm like Puritan movement all from the very beginning. So yeah, I'm not offering myself off as a sacrificial lamb. You going to put the you know, your head in the noose for it. Pay for your own sins. Yeah, so this is, as I say, what's on the table. It's a competition between us women of competition for meal ticket husbands. Well, I don't need a meal ticket husband to survive, and that's why everybody hates me. Because I did show that even if everything fell apart, I just keep on moving and I pick up the pieces and move forward and get everybody in my family moving forward. And that's what is, you know, oh God, I've shown that I'm not a stupid bimbo trad wife, and that completely destroys the narrative of the feminists. So I got to be shut up by these having it all feminist. So I don't need your meal ticket husbands. You guys, that's your bag of tricks. Mansions, I really don't care. I'm like, you know what, you guys, mansions come and go real quick. It's just some, you know, it's just a place to hang your head, to hang your hat, and hang your head in shame for some of you. Okay, so mansions I don't care about. Material wealth, like some fancy car. No, I like the exercise of walking, and you know, I don't have any car payments or insurance or anything like that. So I'm good on that one. What is it? So mansions, material wealth. Yeah, I really never. The only thing I really care about is my kids. My family hung me out to dry. It's a shame, but it is what it is. The only thing that really is important to me are my sons. So, your material wealth, you can offer me the world, and I didn't give a shit. So yeah, that leaves the kids. So, yeah, y'all got a big problem there. All of your kids are involved in all sorts of shit. And they're all entitled Nepo babies. Meghan McCain is one that just gets my goat, but she's not. Cornelia Guest, well, unfortunately or fortunately, she doesn't have a daughter. So, yeah.
The monetary policy that I have to put in place with my colleagues is focused on one priority, which is price stability. We have a single mandate. It's a primary objective. We also look at all sorts of other factors, including the economic purposes pursued by the other institutions, the employment situation, what have you. But the primary objective that we have is price stability. And that's the way in which we, procure this environment where fiscal policies, where other policies can be deployed with a degree of...
The primary objective is to aid and abet the oligarchs and the industrialists in concentrating wealth and power into their hands and oppressing and exploiting workers.
Of certainty about what is the future. So we do manage that as closely and as well as we can to procure that stability.
Should it be a dual mandate, central bank?
I don't ask myself that question. I've got enough on my plate, thank you very much. And I do what I have to do.
I'm wondering, from your standpoint, Managing Director Georgieva, this idea of how to create resilience and frankly, faith in institutions at a time of such transformation. I'd be curious, do you think we're doing a good job?
Well, I think that we're doing a better job now than we did 10 years ago and then 10 years beforehand. We are learning. There is a amazing learning process that is going on. And my conclusion of what I have experienced in my life, what I experienced in this institution is
she memorizes the talking points and doesn't miss a beat.
Default. One, keep channels of communication open with others. Whether you agree with them or you don't agree with them, make sure that there are opportunities so you can pick up on something that may matter to you. I think of the IMF as being par excellence place where we keep channels of communication open. 191 countries, they come, they talk with each other. Make it as provocative as possible. I'll tell you one thing I communicate when the members come. My message is, leave your trade wars, your cold wars, outside. Come here, let's talk about the economy. How can we do better for people? My second conclusion is, Tharman is right that countries that are faced with more constraints...
It's like, sometimes I'm like, you guys, is it any wonder that your victims, sometimes get so mad that they lose it? And this is where we have the terrorist attacks. However, most of the terrorist attacks we're learning that authorities a lot of times are involved in producing the situation.
It's maybe actually more active, but I think there is one more ingredient, and it is leadership. You have countries in similar situations, and one does much better than other. And you look under the hood of these countries very often, more often than not, there is leadership. And the third conclusion I draw is that there are certain things we know. We don't have to...
Too many chefs spoil the soup. You always need... This is why you have project leaders. Anytime you do need somebody who is in charge of the bigger picture and delegates jobs, allocation of resources. And this is where, the human resource management industry is a catastrophe. They've taken over the functions that socialites and trad wives and, the wives of the movers and shakers used to do. And this gets into the queens. The kings were out with the commercial and the political arena. That was under their purview. And the queens, the social arena. But now the queens want to take over the commercial and political arenas from the men, and everybody's throwing out the social arena. One of the points that I made with Christine Lagarde and Kristalina Georgieva is that their husbands, or and Lagarde, it's her partner, they're not married, are honorary chairs of the IMF Family Association. They got emails from me, ignored me. It's their funeral.
Discover them. We know them. We know that fiscal buffers protect you when a shock comes. We know that transparency in institutions, accountability to people, make it more likely they would make good decisions. We know that when we provide people with opportunity.
These people have been told all of their lives, you know, you're given opportunities. I forget her, I think her father was like a carpenter or, you know, manual laborers. Her parents and both parents worked because they had to. You know, all of her life, oh, we're going to give you these education, these opportunities, and, you know, stellar career in World Bank. She's had her head filled her entire career, her entire life, of how smart and important she is. Oh, that's what they did with Marie Antoinette and a lot of them.
To learn, they can adjust to a changing environment. So there is a menu of things we know. And then the question is, how do we make sure they get done? And then we hit the toughest component of all, common sense. Yeah. The most common thing about common sense, not very common. We don't do so many stupid things just because we refuse to be sort of honest with the reality that's around us.
Yeah. So we've thought a lot about what's been happening with this technology.
None of them want to face reality. I mean, even somebody of Bobby Kennedy's presidential campaign was like, I'm like, I don't know why they're ignoring me. You know, just ignoring me. He would have it in the, you know, he would be in the White House now if he listened to me. Oh, he doesn't want to involve in any unpleasantness.
And where it's going. And as you think about the last 20 years or 15 years, the world had to deal with an economic shock of the financial crisis that resulted in most of the developed world and the developing world building out resiliency, building out institutions, putting a lot of, I would say, gates in the gears to make it so that we could have more safety and more security in the financial markets and in the economies. But we have this technology that's an unstoppable force that's coming. And I would say that at this point, with that level of transformation from this incredible capability that's on our doorstep, we have to move to a time of agility and adaptability.
Absolutely.
And so we have to look at what's made us so resilient. There are a lot of things. I mean, I will point to the US markets for a second. I mean, we are hyper resilient as a system. The US equity markets, we're all interlinked, we're networked, we have failures, we've had mistakes, and so we've all figured out how to make that resiliency work and handle and
no, we have networks and we're all protection ragged. We got each other's back, and no matter what happens, we'll throw the passengers overboard and we'll all get in the life rafts and save each other.
Immense amount of volumes. You're seeing huge volumes and huge shocks in the system, and they're all being handled and absorbed. So that resiliency is there. But now is the time to say, okay, on that basis of that foundation, what do you really need to have to remain resilient while becoming adaptable? Because that adaptability, whether it's digital assets or AI, adaptation is happening. And so if the institutions aren't prepared for it or countries not prepared for it and they're calcified in their views, they will be left behind. But if they say, okay, I want to have this base and make it so that we have a resilient base.
Yeah, and as long as you drink and pass out our Kool-Aid, you won't be left behind. If you don't, you're going to be left behind.
We change our policies. We think differently.
Discrimination, elimination, and intimidation. Remember, DEI. We hold that over your head with the jobs.
About regulation. We think differently about taking down some of the gates, whether it's state regulation for us in zoning or whether it's country regulation in the EU. That's holding us back from allowing this new technology to take force, and thinking about education, thinking about all the things that as a region or as a country really need to change. I personally think that we're at this cusp of this moment, and that leadership's critical to making sure that it's successful and it's propagated around the world.
Mm-hmm. We're almost out of time, so I do want to get to this question, and Madame Lagarde, I'm going to put you on the spot with this. There is a lot of hope, as you can see, in all of the things that artificial intelligence can do. There's also a question about whether we have priced that all in and then some, and the systemic risk that comes with how high valuations have gotten, how high spending has gotten. How concerned are you about that, given the fact that in the near term, you need to manage financial stability as a risk as well?
Well, I agree very much with some of the points made by Adena, but I was also thinking that this should...
You need to manage financial stability as a risk as well.
Should not happen at the expense of financial stability.
Right.
And this should not happen at the expense of the right distribution and the right diffusion of those improvements resulting from artificial intelligence. We don't want to create a universe where there would be a massive divide between those who benefit from it and those who suffer as a result. So I think when it comes to policymakers, we have to be very careful that those two factors are taken into account. And it cannot be just technology unleashed and happen what happens. I think policymakers have a key role to play.
So I want to say here, We all give a round of applause to.
I don't think that Christine Lagarde is a complete psychopath. I think that Kristalina Georgieva is, but I don't think that Christine Lagarde is. And that's a rarity. Really, that's a rarity. Okay, so we're going to go to Nate Valhalla and his interview with Professor Zhang. Is the Iran war actually over? This extremely interesting conversation. See, just, you know, it is sometimes valuable what these people have.
All right, we're going to get started here.
I like it. Kash Patel and Valhalla.
All right. Here we go. Another Friday Night Live with a fantastic guest. I'm excited about this one. I'm a fan. We have Professor Zhang on the show. And Professor, I want to, we got to start this the right way because this is a little bit different interview than most people. So you may have been with. So I want to say, 你好吗, Zheng Lao Shi. 我的名字是大户大小的大老虎的老。你的中文名字是 Zhang 老师，可是你有没有英文名字吗？
我没有英文名字你可以叫我姜老师。
我说一些中文，可是我不说中文3年，所以我的中文是现在是不好。
对。
Okay, all right, guys. Sorry, that's the first guest I've ever been able to speak Mandarin to. So glad to have you on.
I wish we had had the
we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff tonight. Obviously, the war's all over the place right now.
See, Valhalla. Just like every single blonde bimbo in there with high heels, not necessarily stupid. Every guy out there with muscles and all of these tattoos all over the place and green beret doesn't mean they're
from maybe a
uneducated
peace deal today to it sounds like the ceasefire has already been broken today and Iran is announcing they're reclosing the strait perhaps. So a lot to talk about. First thing, if you just want to introduce yourself to the viewers who may not know who you are, so you can speak for yourself on that one.
Yeah, so my name is Jiang Xueqian. I'm a high school teacher in Beijing. I'm probably the most famous high school teacher from China in the world right now. I'm not a full credentialed professor, just so we're clear, and just so the internet does not go crazy. But my nickname is Professor Jiang. That's what the internet calls me, and because my name is hard to pronounce, native could probably pronounce it. Jiang Xueqian. Most people refer to me as Professor Jiang. So that's my intro. Yes.
Now you are. I mean, you've been around for quite a while. You got a giant platform as is, but you've really come to prominence recently, and you already know what I'm going to bring up here. Based off your 3 predictions, and your 3 big predictions for, I'm sure most people have seen this already, were that that Donald Trump would win the election, the United States would go to war with Iran, and that Iran would win the war. Those are the 3 bold predictions. I made 2 of the 3 of those, but I didn't predict the 3rd. I don't think anybody did at the time. So could we maybe walk through how you got to that? How did you get to that prediction when you did? Because you came to that prediction way before anybody would remotely have made that prediction based off, especially number 3, right? Nobody would have predicted number 3. Could you walk us through how you got there?
Right. So just to clarify, my 3rd prediction is not that Iran would win the war. My 3rd prediction is the United States would lose the war.
Okay.
That's
that's fair.
Distinction.
Yeah, no, it is right.
Because it's possible both the United States and Iran lose this war.
Correct.
So just to clarify. Okay. So my thinking back then was that in 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. And this changed the geopolitical map because Ukraine and Russia together control about 1/3 of the world's carbohydrates. And if Putin were allowed to consolidate his gains in Ukraine, this would put tremendous pressure on global trade. And so there's a very famous theory called McKenna thesis, McKenna-Hartland thesis. And this is what governs Anglo-American grand strategy in the world. So both Britain and America are primarily naval powers that control maritime choke points around the world. Right. Now, there's only one counter to naval supremacy, and that is to create something called the Eurasian heartland, which is that one power would emerge to unify Europe and Asia and create intercontinental trade, which would negate Britain and America's control over the seas. So there was always fear that either Russia or Germany or the Ottoman Empire would arise. And so for the past 400 years, Anglo-American foreign policy has been to destabilize the Eurasian continent, primarily through the Middle East. And so if Russia were to control Ukraine, then what Russia could do is work with Iran and China to create a Eurasian heartland, a trade bloc called BRICS, right? And so America would need to destabilize this alliance. And the best way to do that is to attack Iran, primarily because Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. And also they can use the proxies, which is Israel, in order to destabilize the region. So that was my basic thinking. But then I asked myself, okay, well, are there historical precedents for this, where an empire goes and attacks a nation unprovoked for no particular reason? Well, historically, there have been lots of examples. The most famous example is during the Peloponnesian War, Athens attacked Sicily for no particular reason. But if you look at these historical examples, what happens is you recognize that when you do that, when an empire goes and attacks a foreign land for no particular reason, the empire ends up losing this war. It doesn't mean that Sicily or Iran will win the war, but it means that the empire will lose the war. And the reason why is that the empire is overextended, it's over-leveraged, and it doesn't really have the political will to win the war. So just by studying some historical patterns, I came to the conclusion that America will probably lose this war, meaning that it'll be forced to retreat from the Middle East.
Yeah, and I mean, I've talked about that a ton on my show as well. I call this a no one's winning war, right? Everybody loses is kind of the way I'm looking at it. The United States is losing. I don't think Iran's really winning. I mean, but they kind of don't have to, I guess. We'll talk about that. And then really the rest of the world, for the most part, is losing. Maybe not China and maybe not Russia, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, it feels like, to your point, that's an even more impressive prediction of understanding that Iran doesn't necessarily win, but they also don't have to win. The United States just has to lose. And so that kind of brings us to where we're at currently. So currently, the United States has kind of got its, its thing caught in a bear trap, it feels like. Doesn't feel like we have a way out, but we also feels like we don't have a way through currently. So, you know what I mean? The way through is a protracted ground invasion, massive regime change, hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers probably die. But the way out doesn't seem like it's really, maybe there is. Maybe we could talk about maybe the way you see the war moving forward from its current state, if the United States even has a way out. But currently what we're looking at is a little bit of a pause, sort of, but it sounds like, talks are falling through. Iran just said, today, and I'll kind of pull these things up as we go, but Iran's state media came out and said today that it is not true what Donald Trump said. They have no interest and they're not willing to give up any of their uranium. And they also are announcing they're potentially reclosing the strait because Israel bombed Lebanon today after the new ceasefire. So what's your feelings about the current state of the conflict as of today?
Well, I'm getting whiplash just from reading the news, right? Because every hour the news changes. It's either, we're going to have peace tomorrow or they're sending ground troops tomorrow. So it's very confusing, and there's a lot of conflicting signals coming from the Trump White House. So for me, one big question I try to do is look at why this is happening. Because before the ceasefire, it seemed as though that the Americans and the Iranians were committed to total war. Trump himself said that he wanted to bomb the Iranians back to the Stone Age. And then he gave the Iranians a few ultimatums. The last ultimatum was for Tuesday. And then when the deadline came, he said,
bomb them back to the Stone Age.
Okay, we're going to surrender to the Iranians. We're going to agree to the Iranian 10-point plan, and we're going to have negotiations in Pakistan. And then when the negotiations happened in Pakistan, J.D. Vance went and said, basically, when you have to do whatever we tell you, or we will start bombing you again. So this is all very confusing. And so I want to propose a theory to you as to why this is happening. And you're going to know a lot more about this than I do, okay? But I think that why this war has turned a radical turn, why peace negotiations have started in the first place, is something happened 2 weekends ago that the news media is covering up, that Trump is desperately trying to cover up, which is 2 weekends ago. Remember, this was the successful pilot rescue, right? This F-15 got shot down near Isfahan, and one pilot was rescued, but the other pilot, the weapons operator, he climbed to a mountain ridge, and then he was extracted successfully by a special forces operation. Okay, so that's what was reported to us by the Trump White House. But what people are suspecting is, because a lot of this story doesn't really make sense, what people suspect is that this was actually a failed uranium heist. A special forces operation was sent into Isfahan to try to extract the uranium from that facility. I don't know why they would do something like that, and I don't actually know the specifics, but it would explain a lot. For example, why was that two C-130s were destroyed? And then why is it that the pilots, we have absolutely no idea who they are, and why have not they talked to news media so far? Because if you go to 2003, during Operation Iraqi Freedom, Jessica Lynch was captured by the Iraqis. And
true, that was a big cover-up.
And that was a big news story. And she was paraded in America. So this is very strange, okay? But what the Iranians are saying, and this is being reported by the Chinese news media, and so I know this with the Chinese news media. What the Iranians are saying is they have 50 Delta Force operators as hostages. The operation failed. They captured 50 Delta Force operators, and now they're holding them as hostages. And if that were the case, this would explain a lot about Trump's behavior, where now he's desperate to make a deal as soon as possible. Because I think, like, if this were to come out, if the American people were to know that the Iranians have 50 hostages, this is a replay of 1979 Tehran hostage situation, where the students overran the U.S. embassy and held U.S. embassy staff as hostages. And remember that incident sunk the Carter presidency. That is what allowed Reagan to defeat Carter in 1980. So this represents a huge domestic political crisis for Trump. But that is one possible theory to explain why things are happening the way they are. What is your take on the situation?
Yeah, you're not going to like it. Yeah, I don't believe that story at all. And I'll walk you through why. I think a lot of it is misunderstanding, one, around how the 123rd STS pararescue actually operates. The story that the official narrative, I guess you could call it, is actually completely normal for how you act pararescue, how they actually operate. And so I actually did a video on this, and the pictures are actually very important to understand. Let me see if I can pull up was it this? Yeah, let me pull this video up and actually show you in the audience some pictures here for people who actually, the 23rd STS, let me show you. So a lot of people, I'll talk about it, and then I'll show the pictures of how this actually works, to where you're going to see that it actually is not that crazy of a story. So understanding, here's why I have a big problem with that story. Okay, what that story, it sounds awesome. First of all, I'll tell you, I've trained to clear underground nuclear bunkers back in 2018 when the potential North Korea war with the United States was kicking off. First Special Forces Group, which I was in, was the lead planners for that. And we had to actually sort of plan for a lot of those types of things, trying to get into underground nuclear facilities and things like that. I can tell you it's a massive undertaking that would have taken far more assets than we saw deployed, first of all. But really what you have is you have two competing stories here. The first competing story is the narrative you're just talking about, which it is kind of an interesting thought. And I could see maybe the United States go for it. The problem is the real story is actually more of a knock on Donald Trump than the uranium story, because the uranium story suggests, and I saw a lot of different versions of this, that Delta Force, Army Special Forces went in, tried to do this big uranium heist, and maybe there's hostages taken. I've also heard 1,500 Iranian soldiers were killed. There's 1,000 different stories on this. The idea that 50 Delta Force operators are held hostage, I've got friends, active duty friends in Delta Force that I've talked to, that's not a thing, unless they're covering it up too, but from the guys in Delta Force that I know, nobody has said a word about that at all. So that's a little bit hard to believe. But really, when we talk about the official story is really important for people to understand and not overlook. And that is that the United States carried out the biggest bombing campaign of the war, bombing civilian infrastructure, bridges, all sorts of different power infrastructure and things like that, which is all war crimes. So what in my opinion happened, looking at all of it, the United States committed a bunch of war crimes, got a pilot shot down while committing those war crimes, and then the rescue operation, which what happened, the 123rd STS goes in and they have A-10 aircraft. These are close air support aircraft that are naturally part of rescue operations that are guarding the 123rd STS.
And they did this also. Amal Clooney can come in later and make some money from going after this when the Democrats get in. See how the system maintains.
And two of those were shot down. The government still hasn't admitted to one of those being shot down. I actually posted about, or I made a video about that before it even technically happened. That's not to say how I knew that, but and then we got a UH-60 shot down. Then what happens is you do have that pilot, the weapons systems operator. The first pilot gets recovered. The A-10 pilot gets shot down, gets recovered. The weapons operator, everybody thinks it's this crazy story because he was so far away from the other pilot. Well, understanding those pilots do not eject at the same time. The second pilot ejects first, the rear pilot, because if the front pilot were to eject first, because they're like this, he ejects here, he would smash into that back pilot and kill him. So there's a separation when they eject, and then also they're under parachute. Also, that fighter jet is moving at potentially, 1,500 miles per hour. So you can get, tens to 50 plus miles of separation between these pilots, between the aircraft, because they're also coming at elevation under a parachute. Winds at elevation are hundreds of miles an hour. That parachute, I was on a military free fall team where we do military skydiving jumps from distances of 20,000 feet and above. And you can fly, the distances you can cover are absolutely.
Yeah, you're never getting me up on that shit. Oh, no. Somebody said your job entails jumping out of an airplane with a parachute on your back. I'm like, yeah, you can give it to somebody else.
Absolutely massive in a parachute. So there's potential that those pilots aren't going to be close to each other. But the big tell here is where everybody thinks there's no way this is what a rescue operation would look like, because we lost 2 MC-130s and then 4 Little Bird helicopters. Everybody thought there's no way you would use all that for a rescue operation. That's not actually true, because the 123rd STS literally does this to get into areas they wouldn't be able to get into otherwise. Let me pull this up and show everybody them actually training to do this. So they'd actually do this. What they'll do is they'll take MC-130s, they'll put 2 Little Bird helicopters inside of the MC-130. That's because these helicopters can't hold that much fuel. So if they need to fly from Iraq all the way to outside Tehran, for example, the helicopter won't make it there, but you can put them on these big MC-130s. And as you can see here, they wheel them off, they set them up, they put the blades on, and off they go. The reason why they do this is now those 123rd STS operators plus Delta Force, or it was, we believe, DevGru, which is SEAL Team 6 that actually assisted them. They can then take those Little Bird helicopters, get up into the mountains, get onto terrain, and they can actually go and rescue that pilot wherever he may be. Now, what happened was, Jason, and this is, again, the rescue operation here was botched. It was a terrible plan. JSOC fucked this up when they did it, and they sent in the 2 MC-130s with the 4 Little Birds plus the Air Force pararescue plus the DevGru operators. Where they landed, they thought was going to be a runway that was a typical aircraft runway. When it turned out is a bunch of moon dust. So if you're in the Middle East or been in the Middle East, you can get huge moon dust, that sits. They land those aircraft and they realize they can't take those aircraft back off. So what they got to do, they download the helicopters, they actually go retrieve the pilot, come back, and because the aircraft are stuck, they can't get the helicopters back on. They had to have two CASA-style, like Cessna aircraft fly in to actually get all these to get the pilot and get everybody else out. And then what they couldn't do is leave all these American aircraft. They're only about 2.5 miles outside of the city center with 2 million people, where they had to destroy the aircraft. Blow up the aircraft because they're not going to leave it there for Iranians. So so again, to my point here, it's not a for people to say, oh, there's no way there was 2 MC-130s and 4 Little Birds. You can see there that 123rd STS literally training. This is how they do these operations. Or, right, you could have, those are the two narratives. You have the United States committing a bunch of war crimes, botching a bunch of stuff, almost getting a bunch of people killed through negligence and incompetence, or the heroic story of special operations and Delta Force going to try to take down uranium. To me, as someone who knows how special operations works and knows how all of these things are done, it's not that ridiculous of a story. It's it's not even that impressive of a story. If you go back to like Mac v. SOG in Vietnam and look at their pararescue operations, those are 1,000 times crazier and more impressive. So anyway, for me, I don't believe that narrative at all, just because I just think it's a little bit of, one, it lets Donald Trump off and Pete Hegseth off the hook for committing a bunch of war crimes against Iran. And two, if there was 50 Delta Force operators kidnapped, people in my community would hear about it. You wouldn't be able to keep that completely quiet. And also Iran would not keep that a secret. Iran would use that as massive leverage against the United States in that big PR propaganda campaign. So anyway. Okay. A little bit long-winded there, but just so for you, I mean, so you have some context of how we're sort of looking at it in the special operations realm.
Right.
So.
Well, that's fantastic, and that clarifies the situation for me. So this leads to another speculation, and the speculation is actually much worse, which is that Donald Trump is almost intentionally trying to lose this war against Iran.
It does feel that way.
And the reason why, okay, so let's let me explain my logic here, and feel free to interrupt me to clarify or to ask that. Okay, all right. So Donald Trump has always had issues with the current global economy, where the two major pillars of the global economy are the GCC, which provides cheap energy to the world, and China, which provides manufacturing to the world. These are the two major pillars of the current global economy. And Donald Trump thinks that, for the longest time, he thinks that America is a sucker in this relationship because it's the American consumer who goes into too much debt in order to finance the GCC and China. So he's tried throughout his presidency to try to change this relationship, mainly by imposing tariffs on the world, right? But the Supreme Court told him you can't do that. That's the authority of Congress. You don't have the authority as President of the United States to impose tariffs on the world. So then you look at what's been happening these past few months. First, January 3rd, Delta Force goes into Venezuela and kidnaps Maduro. You have 1/3 of America's naval assets parked off the Caribbean to enforce something called the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine or the Monroe Doctrine, right? Yeah. And now you have this war in the Middle East. But not only that, but I'm not sure if you've been following this very closely, but these past 45 days, there have been 45 fires in oil refineries around the world. The most prominent being in Geelong, Australia. And Australia is really suffering because of this war, right? They're basically ran out of jet diesel. So this attack or this accident, like we don't know fully yet what actually happened in Australia. It's a major setback for Australia. And so if we just speculate as to why this is happening, well, ultimately, it's the United States who benefits from all this, because if the GCC is destroyed in this war, if the Middle East can no longer export oil, the entire world becomes dependent on North America and Venezuela for oil. So remember that after Trump's victory in Venezuela, he convened in the White House a meeting of oil executives. And basically Trump said, listen, we now have the world's largest oil reserves. Go in and exploit it. Let's make America great again. And the oil executives were basically like, well, this would cost us, 5 years and $20 billion.
$500 billion for the infrastructure.
We're not going to do this, man. But now if the entire world is destroyed, if the world's not getting oil, they're now incentivized to go to Venezuela and, drill, baby, drill. So basically what's going to happen is that if this war continues, basically the world enters famine, the world runs out of energy, and the world becomes entirely dependent on Greater North America for energy and fertilizer. And this would make America great again, because America would switch from an economy focused on finance to an economy focused on manufacturing and resource development. And so this almost goes back to America in the 1930s, 1940s, when the world was at war, but America was safe because it was secluded in a kind of fortress, and it could supply resources to the world. It became very wealthy because of this. So if you just look at what nations Trump has been threatening in North America, right? They're Greenland, they're Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Honduras. You add them all up, and what you get is something called Greater North America, or the Technate, which is a continental fortress that is completely self-sufficient and which can provide resources to the rest of the world. So this may be the grand plan all along, to destroy the Middle East and make the world dependent on North American energy.
So I actually had this conversation with a buddy to where I do think you could have a long game plan here where that could 10, 15 years from now actually put America in a place of absolute dominance. It would have to be done correctly. But what you pointed out there, I think, is a big linchpin, is that American oil conglomerates have no interest in investing in the infrastructure to do this because it's all done up in Canada. They already have it. Why spend $1 trillion investing in this when we don't really need to? And so I think the big problem with that theory is.
But I think this brings some insight into what Trump is going through his and the people who control him mind. Because everybody it's crazy. There's often method to the madness of even the craziest people. And that's the challenge, figure it out.
understanding oil as a global commodity. And the idea is, okay, if you destroy the Middle East and you shut down 35% of the world's oil, that's fine. And now all the world comes to the United States. Well, one, we don't have the capacity to pump that much oil, nor do we have the ability to refine the oil correctly.
Even with my mother, there was always method to her madness. I guess that's why I became an expert and figured it out.
And so really what you now have is have a system of, okay, you destroyed 35% of the world's oil production, but the United States can't make up that 35%, and your basic global oil supply and demand, right? The quantity gets reduced all the way, down to, let's say, 70% of what it was. Okay, this is awesome for America Oil, like Chevron, Exxon, and Mobil. They're really not incentivized for this now, because why? Now oil prices are $150 a barrel, and they're selling to everybody. And so what you have here is Asia, Australia, Korea, Japan, all of our allies who have to run to the United States because they can't get the oil. They're getting 90% of their oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. That's great, but that's just entered all of that Asian market into the American oil market. So now American consumers are competing with, all of Asia for access to that oil. And if you're Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, now you can sell that oil to our Asian allies for double the cost. So you're really not incentivized to actually jack that production up because you're making money hand over fist. So my big problem with, I do think what your theory is there, if it was done correctly, it could lead to massive American dominance around the world in 10 years. But I don't believe that because of the things I just mentioned, that the political establishment, the billionaires, the tech conglomerates, the oil conglomerates, I don't see why they would have any incentive to want to foot that bill, to want to build all that capacity out when they can, again, they're just getting massively enriched right now, So that's my big problem, I think, with Donald Trump playing the 7D chess there, is that I don't see that happening. I just see it causing a global oil crisis and a famine, like you said, and America's not going to have the capacity to make up for it. I don't know your thoughts on that.
Right. So let's game theory this and say, okay, you're right in that ExxonMobil, Chevron, they don't want to do this. It's too much of a long-term investment for them. They're not incentivized to do this. But let's just say Trump goes to China mid-May. And I think President Xi and Donald Trump will meet 4 times this year. And let's just say they come to an arrangement where it's not the Americans who are developing the infrastructure in Venezuela. It's the Chinese who are doing this. Because it's the Chinese who are desperate for the energy.
In America? Like the refineries? Okay.
Venezuela, right? So Americans aren't going to go to Venezuela to develop that infrastructure. The Chinese will, because the Chinese have been doing this in Venezuela anyway, as well as Africa. So the Chinese have tens of billions of dollars invested in Venezuela anyway. They have the expertise, they have the political will, they have the resources, the manpower to go do this. Because we have to assume that, if this were to happen, then this would require tremendous manpower, right? So is that a possibility? Do you think?
Well, yeah, I could see that, but that almost you can't have China and the United States sort of be massive adversaries at that point. I mean, we're not. The hard thing is our economies are already so intertwined that the idea that we would ever go to war with China is a non sequitur to begin with. But yeah, I mean, I guess I never thought about that with China being as invested as it is in Venezuela already. But that would be a massive shift in the optics of that in politics. If Donald Trump were to pitch that, like, we're going to ally with China and they're going to build the refinery infrastructure in Venezuela and we're going to take all the oil. I guess anything's possible, but I just could not see American politics signing off on that, right? Because it would it'd be great for the United States, but it'd also be great for China. And that's one of those things where we're like, well, do we want to bite off our nose to spite our face? Interesting theory, not something I thought about before.
So something I will mention is, look at these peace negotiations between Iran and the United States, right? Happening in Pakistan. So let's think about why this is happening. Because the United States have been asking for these negotiations for a long time. Because for these past 7-8 weeks, the war's not going well. Iran has always been like, no, why would we negotiate with you? Because you guys are dishonest. You're going to send Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and you screw us over again. What's the point of negotiating with you guys, right? So the question then is, why would Iran agree to go to Pakistan and risk, getting bombed by the Israelis or another sneak attack by the Americans? And if you look at the reporting, it seems like China is playing a major role behind the scenes. Pakistan is the front man, they're the ones organizing the peace negotiations, right? But it's China that's pulling the strings behind the scenes. Remember, China is Iran's largest customer. So if China is like, you have to negotiate a peace treaty, then Iran has no choice in the matter. And why would China want a peace treaty? Because China is really suffering from this war. Because China receives 50 to 60% of its energy needs from the Middle East, not just from Iran, but also from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So Qatar and Saudi Arabia has been applying pressure on China to say, you know what, we're going to destroy it out here. And if this war goes sideways, you're the big loser in this war because you lose half of your energy. And China has these AI ambitions. It's trying to build up as a technological state. And so it needs all this energy from wherever it can. Venezuela, Russia, and Iran provide a third of China's energy needs. And because of America's naval blockades, a lot of this energy has gone offline, right? So if you're China and you're thinking of like, what I do because the United States can impose a naval blockade on me. And if this war in the Middle East continues for too long, then all my strategic reserves gets depleted, right? So China's in a really bad situation. So that's why I think China is the one pushing for a ceasefire talk. And it's China that's really trying to come to an agreement as soon as possible. They want this war to end as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I actually thought that when we were starting to talk about how do we get peace negotiations on the table, I started talking about, well, you got to have somebody like China be an intermediary here, because there's no way the United States and Iran will talk to each other. It's much like Ukraine and Russia, right? Like, why is the United States the one that's always trying to negotiate between the two? It's like, well, yeah, you need that third intermediary because those two countries are at war and they hate each other right now, and there's no way. To your point, and to me, yeah, I think it makes 100% sense that China is the one that's sort of forcing and leading those negotiations, and they kind of make sense as being the country that would do it, being allied with Iran, but also not being necessarily at war or total enemies with the United States. Here's a question for you, though. China definitely is, everybody's being hurt by the war, right? American consumers at the gas station are being hurt by the war. However, there are certain countries that are being hurt worse than others. And I would argue that China, to your point, is not being hurt as bad as our Asian allies. If you look at Japan, if you look at Korea, I mean, China may have 50% of its oil and energy that's coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Japan has 95%, right? Philippines, Indonesia, Korea, Taiwan, Australia. These are all countries that are almost solely dependent on oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz or Mandab. And so for me, it kind of feels like if you're China and you're looking at this situation, you're China and Russia, you're BRICS. If you can continue to keep Iran afloat and keep this going and continue to punish allies, the United States allies in Asia, you almost start to force them to sort of capitulate like we saw India start to do and say, hey, you know what? We can't get any of our oil out of the Strait of Hormuz right now, but we can get it if we buy it in Chinese yuan, right? And so maybe we start to see an actual long-term attack on the U.S. petrodollar by using this war. If you're China and Russia, it almost feels like depending on to your point, everybody's losing. Who's losing the worst? And it feels like China is probably not the ones losing the worst comparative to like Japan. Japan is basically working off all strategic oil reserves right now. And at some point, our allies have to look at the United States and go, hey, you got to provide the oil, which you can't do at this point, not at the levels that is currently coming out of the Middle East, or we got to turn to China. And, I think I was going to ask you about this. We just saw Taiwan, the opposition leader in Taiwan, meeting with Xi Jinping for the first time in 10 years. If you're Taiwan and you go, hey, we can't get any oil and the United States isn't really a good ally anymore, maybe we got to hedge our bets and maybe reunification is something we want to consider. What's your thoughts on sort of this war driving our Asian allies potentially towards relationships with China and away from us?
I think you're absolutely right. I think like it is actually Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Thailand. These countries are really suffering a lot more than China. So I'm based in Beijing, and I can tell you that this war hasn't really impacted us much as, say, in Thailand, where they're now forced to fuel ration, they're forced to work from home, they're running out of gas. So the Philippines has declared a state of emergency. So these other nations are really suffering, and I'm based in Beijing. I haven't really felt the pressure, like maybe airplane tickets have gone up in price, but that's not a big deal for a lot of people. So you're right in that China can probably sustain this war a lot longer. The problem is that if you think midterm or long term, China's still in a world of hurt, right? So Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, has just visited Beijing, and China and Russia have signed an agreement where Russia will supply more energy to China. Okay, and that's fine, okay? But there's some problems with this agreement. First of all, I mean, China's energy needs are so insatiable that Russia by itself cannot supply all its needs.
Right.
That's the first problem. Second problem is that it's going to take time for Russia to build capacity, right? So this Trans-Siberian pipeline, it's been another 5 to 10 years before it comes online. So if China waits 10 years, it'll be fine. But it has to wait 5 to 10 years, and that's going to be a huge problem for the Chinese economy. And the third problem is, okay, if you are a Chinese geopolitical strategist, if you're working in Beijing and you're like, okay, well, before we were reliant on a diversity of sources for energy needs, including Venezuela, the Middle East, Russia, even the Western Hemisphere, and now we're completely reliant on Russia. Reliant on Russia. Is that a good thing for us in the long term, given our history with Russia, given the fact that we share a border with Russia, and given the fact that Russia has always been militaristic, aggressive, and expansionist? I mean, like, is this really a situation we want to be in the long term, where we are just completely reliant on Russian energy, so they can set prices, they can turn off the tap whenever they want? I mean, is this a really good situation for us? Right. That's
a great point. Yeah. The long term, if you look at it, that's why I said, hey, potentially the United States, 10, 15 years, if you actually do this as an actual strategy and you do the correct things to do it, right? You first have to actually secure Venezuela's oil. That's still a little, I know we're working now with, keep in mind, the Maduro regime is still in power. I think a lot of people forget the fact that when you change a leader, that doesn't mean you change the regime. It does seem like the vice president, who's now the president, is more apt towards working with the United States and getting involved with us economically. So there's that. But I didn't think about the fact that if you cut off Venezuela, you cut off the Middle East. China can diversify a little bit to Russia, but Russia can't supply all of China's oil to begin with. So, I mean, even if they wanted to, it would be kind of like the United States just turning it on and supplying the rest of the Asian world right now. Like we wouldn't be able to do that without ramping that production and everything up too. Now, I also wanted to ask, you had 3 major visions for the way forward in the world. I just watched some of that a little bit earlier. Do you want to explain what those are? The current state of the world, I guess, where it could be headed. You had not you had necessarily, but there's 3 major visions for that.
Right. So I see in the next 10, 20 years, 3 major nations trying to dominate the world and achieve their own vision for the world. And these 3 nations are America, Russia, and Israel. China does have a vision.
I thought you were going to say China for sure.
Right. Well, China is the Middle Kingdom, as you know. The Middle Kingdom sees itself as a universe unto itself and doesn't really want to deal with the rest of the world. That's why it built the Great Wall. So China doesn't really have a global vision. It has a vision for itself, but it doesn't really have a global vision. And actually, if you look at Chinese history, in times of major international tumult, what China often does is turtle up. It basically retreats into its borders and closes off naval trade. Okay, so these 3 nations are America, Russia, and Israel. America wants to achieve something called the Greater North America. This was first proposed in the early 20th century, something called a technate. And the idea of the technate is that democracy is inherently flawed because it leads ultimately to political polarization. When you have political polarization in place, it's impossible for the government to work properly.
I mean, we're kind of looking at that in America right now. So I mean, it's kind of
right. And so, what's the solution to this? And the idea is rule by technocrats, rule by engineers who use data, statistics, artificial intelligence in order to develop policies that benefit the people. Okay, that's the first plank. The second plank is to expand America to a point where it becomes entirely self-sufficient, and you do that by annexing Canada, Mexico, right? Canada for its resources, Mexico for its labor. But then you also need to defend yourself, and you do that by taking over Greenland and then blocking off access to North America. You also do that by taking over Colombia and Venezuela. Okay, so that's the idea of the technate. And this is something that's interesting because one of the early proponents of the technate is Elon Musk's grandfather. And Elon Musk,
interesting.
Very, very interesting. And if you just see what's been happening these past few months, right? So Peter Hegseth in the press conference said that he sees Greater North America. He actually used the phrase Greater North America as a defense perimeter for the United States. So that's first point. Second point is, if you look at the national security strategy, which came out a few months ago, actually calls for America to exert greater control over the Western Hemisphere. Basically, see the Western Hemisphere as America's territory. And then you see this push towards AI data centers, and you ask yourself, why are they investing so much in AI data centers when they actually don't produce any profit? Okay,
right.
So you can make the argument like America is slowly moving towards the vision of the technate. That's the first major vision. Do you have any questions about the technate before I move on to the second one?
No, I mean it's basically the idea of decoupling globalism and turning it to regionalism, sort of, but America at the head of that, right? To where, and I'll ask you some questions. I'm well aware of it, right? And also, what you're looking at in the United States is exactly what you're explaining is exactly what's happening. We're watching with the AI bubble, and the entire stock market basically being propped up by AI and the data centers everywhere, and the move into things like everybody's worried about Palantir and things like that, surveillance state type, technocrat type stuff. So I think, I mean, America is on that path right now. I don't think anybody could argue and say we're not headed that way.
Okay. Yeah. So the second major vision is something called the third Rome. Okay, and this is proposed by Alexander Dugin, who is basically Putin's brain. And Dugin's understanding of the world is almost like Samuel Huntington's idea of the class of civilizations, where a civilization is the main constituent unit of the world, and not the nation state. And so what he proposes is that Russia is fundamentally at odds with the West, because Russia is an orthodox society that is traditionalist and family oriented, whereas the West is the Antichrist. It's the Antichrist system. It's secular materialism. It's focused on individualism. It's focused on consumerism. It's focused on secularism, materialism, and this is all part of the Antichrist system. And so he sees this as a fundamental conflict driving geopolitics for the next 10, 20 years. And so what he proposes is an alliance between religious societies. Okay, so he sees Russia as a third Rome. Right, the first Rome was Rome, the second Rome was Constantinople, the third Rome was Moscow. And the idea is there'll be no fourth Rome. And so Moscow will unite with the Iranians, which is Islamic. It will unite with the Islamic world. It will reconcile with the Catholic world. That's
what I was just going to ask you. Would they reconcile with Europe?
Yeah. Exactly. And they will also reconcile with Israel, because Israel is also fundamentally like a extreme religious society, right? So if you're religious,
Russia is very pro. People don't realize Russia is very pro-Israel. You think about how many Russians, and if you think about Ashkenazi Jews, a lot of those come from Russia. So.
Exactly. That's right. And Putin has never really criticized Israel for what happened in Gaza, right? So that's a vision. And so this sets up a conflict ultimately between Russia and the religious community versus the Antichrist system, which will include, this is very important to remember, which will include America and China. Okay, so in this grand vision.
Wow, interesting.
Yes, because China and America are actually more similar than they're different, in that they're both extremely materialistic societies.
Secular, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I wouldn't have even thought of that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes. Okay. But I mean, Dugin proposed this in 1997 in his book, The Foundation of Geopolitics, and because Russia and China have become very close these past 10 years, he's changed this. But if you actually look at his initial theory, then there will eventually be a breaking off, like a divorce between China and Russia because of their worldviews, right? Because of their civilizational fundamentals. Okay, so and like living in China, I can tell you, like, China is not going to be a religious society. Like China does not believe, the world should be So that's the third Rome idea. Okay, now last idea is the idea of Pax Judaica, right? So you can make the argument that what's happening in the Middle East, what's driving this war, is Israel trying to achieve the Greater Israel Project.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the show.
Right. So, I mean, this makes perfect sense because the GCC is being destroyed. Turkey might be brought into this war.
I think that's coming for sure. By the end of Trump's presidency.
Right. So Turkey is destroyed, the GCC is destroyed, Iran is destroyed, and America is destroyed. The only one that's standing is Israel.
Yeah,
and then you achieve the Greater Israel Project. And this is important because Israel, the Levant, has historically been a pivot of global trade. So if you want to access Africa, you have to go through the Levant, right? And Africa has the youngest population in the world, which means that it will be probably the most economically vibrant part of the world in the next 100 years. And
they have the natural resources for it too. If they can ever get the actual systemic or the actual systems in place, get rid of the warlords and everything going on, Africa could become a massive superpower.
Exactly, right? And Israel can control Africa and therefore create Pax Judaica. So these are the three major visions of the world. Okay, the technate, the Greater North America, third Rome, Moscow, and Pax Judaica.
Yeah, and then we come to the you really expand that out, and
Yeah,
then
the
if you
problem is Africa can't stop fighting each other. Everybody's fighting all the time.
have potentially all three of those going on at the same time.
The thing that you keep on pointing out, the African American community here in the United States, excuse me, it was the Africans, tribal wars and stuff like that. They were the ones who sold all of you Africans to the European slave traders. That's not excusing the slave trade, but stop denying that, like, you were innocent victims in the entire system.
some form of fashion, that actually I think becomes a setup for the future of the world that
Excuse me, stop claiming that you were innocent victims.
is unstable. I mean, you're going to see
Exactly.
war everywhere if that's what happens. If we America abandons globalism, which I don't really have a huge problem with, and then goes to strict regionalism, and then that, also talk about Greater Israel Project happening with that, with Russia doing that in their sector of the world. You could have all three of those happen, not perfectly simultaneously, but all three of those things could be working at the same time, and potentially why we see all the political and foreign conflict strife that we see in the world right now. I mean, right now we have more wars going on than there was during World War II, in 2026, and so that's a little bit scary, I think. Is like, that means we're not ushering to de-escalation and peace. We're ramping our way towards essentially, wars all over the world. I don't see how you really, especially if you talk about oil as a the lifeblood of the world being cut off from different countries, and it gets super chaotic. It feels like with that.
Yeah, and also we have to remember, like, these systems are inherently unstable as well, right? Because Israel is reviled in the Middle East, and so once they achieve Patriarcha, we can expect a lot of insurgencies, a lot of resistance from the local peoples against Israel.
Well, and really the entire world right now. If you look what's happening
Sure.
in Europe, right? Europe has completely abandoned Israel at this point, even in America. I mean, we're at an all-time low support. So that becomes, how does, let me get your theory on this. The United States, the people, not the political establishment, the people have become very, very anti-Israel across the board. The politicians, not at all. And so I think we've got to definitely have a time window in which Israel can achieve everything they want to achieve before they lose the support of the United States. Are they able to achieve, Greater Israel Project without the United States military? I feel like they can't. Or what do they have instead? If the United States, because this is going to take some time, maybe. Because you talk about Turkey, right? I talked about this on the show. My prediction weeks ago was when Donald Trump started talking about leaving NATO, I said he's doing that so because Turkey is a NATO ally. The reason why we abandoned NATO is so that way we can start a war with Israel against NATO, and we're not attacking a NATO ally. That was my prediction on what might happen with that. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think one, potentially the United States leaves NATO to attack Turkey with Israel, and two, what happens to the Greater Israel Project if they no longer have the United States?
Yeah, Turkey is very interesting because both Patriarcha and the Third Rome call for the dismantling of Turkey, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the Third Rome prophecy, which is a very important part of the Orthodox tradition, Moscow becomes a Third Rome when it returns the Greeks to Byzantium, which is modern-day Istanbul. Okay, so basically the idea is that at some point Russia and Turkey will go to war, and
With each other.
With each other, yes.
Okay.
And the reasoning is this. The reasoning is that Turkey will join the NATO in Ukraine. And they will do so by blocking off the Bosphorus, right? So basically blockading Russia into the Black Sea. And then Russia will retaliate by attacking Turkey and destroying Turkey, and then allowing the Greeks to return to Byzantium, Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. And once Russia does that, then it will become the leader of the Orthodox world. It can reconcile the Greek and the Russian Orthodox. And then this will lead to reconciliation between the Orthodox and the Catholic. Okay, so that's what the prophecy says. So eventually, Russia and Turkey will go to war. All right. Now, and we know for Greater Israel, Israel also wants a war with Turkey. So it seems possible that there's a secret agreement between Israel and Russia, where Russia attacks from the north and Israel attacks from the south to carve up Turkey.
Great. Oh, interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So Turkey, Turkey's in a very bad situation. They are a corrupt, ossified system. Erdogan has been in power for a long time, and honestly, there's some people who believe that Erdogan is a very, he is a spy. He works for either the CIA or the Mossad. Okay, so let me explain who runs modern-day Turkey. And it's called, people call it Dolme. The Dolme. Have you heard of the Dolme? Okay, so in the year 1666, there was a Jewish prophet, a Jewish religious
Very important. Pay attention here.
man named somebody Zevi. And he declared himself the Messiah, right? Because the Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah, he's come and he will return, right? But the Jews believe the Messiah has not come, and when the Messiah comes, they will be reunited with God. And somebody Zevi declared himself the Messiah. And a third of Jews at the time, about 1 million people, believed he was the Messiah. They were primarily based in Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. And So he's the Jewish equivalent of Jesus Christ. And then what happened was that the Sultan said to Zabtai Zevi, okay, there are a lot of Jews who follow you and they believe you're the Messiah, but if you're the Messiah, that means you can overthrow me, the Sultan. So either your head or the turban, right? The turban basically means you convert to Islam and swear fealty to me, or I will cut off your head. And Zabtai Zevi is fine, I'll cut off your, fine, I will convert. And at that time, this was traumatic for Jews. But this is a very important point. So let me explain. What people don't understand what is that the Jewish Messiah, he's come to redeem the Jewish people, right? And then the question then is like, how do you redeem the Jewish people? Well, Jesus redeemed the people by sacrificing himself in order to atone for the original sin of disobedience, right? Yeah. Well, what's the original sin in the Jewish world? The original sin in the Jewish world is conversion. Right, so you had historically, you had a lot of Jews who converted into Christianity, into Islam,
yeah, makes sense. Yep.
But the Jewish faith is one of blood, right? You're born into the Jewish faith, you don't convert into the Jewish faith. So does that mean like if you are Jewish by blood but you convert, does that mean you burn in hell for all eternity? Because that's what the Jewish faith says, right? What Zabtai Zevi did was he atoned for everyone by saying like, if I'm the Messiah and I can convert, well, so can you, because ultimately it doesn't matter what your faith is. What matters is your relationship with God, right? What matters is in your heart. So you can be any religion you want. It doesn't matter. That's the clothing. What matters is your soul, your connection with God, right? So
yeah, this is very Protestant.
so that's what Zabtai Zevi did. And there were about 300 families that converted with Zabtai Zevi, and they were called a dome, which means turncoat.
Well, that makes sense.
And okay, but this is the 1666. Okay, these 300 families were on the surface Islamic, but they were still Jewish. Secretly, they practiced Judaism secretly, and over time they accumulated a lot of power for themselves. The reason why was that in the 19th century, Turkey entered into the Crimean War against Russia, and Turkey could not defeat Russia, so the French and the British financed the Ottoman Empire. But in return, the Ottoman Empire had to surrender financial system to the French and the British. And when the French and British took over the Ottoman system, who did they?
The banking system, yeah.
Yeah, who did they have run the banking system for them?
I wonder.
The Dome,
I wonder.
Right?
Yeah,
Right, okay.
Shocker.
And then what happened was this. The Germans came along and said, you know what, the French and the British are screwing you over, so let us run the banking system for you. And the Ottomans were like, yeah, thank you, okay? And then this starts something called the Young Turks movement, where the French and the British, through the Dome, financed Ataturk and the Young Turks to overthrow the Ottoman Empire and to establish the Turkish Republic. And guess who runs Turkey today? The Dome run Turkey today.
Yeah, that's a
right?
backstory.
Right. So you can see how maybe secretly Israel and Turkey get along very, very well, because the people who run both nations are the same people.
Interesting. Could you see something like what we saw in Syria with Al-Jilani, I call him because he was the leader of Al-Qaeda and I'm a global war on terror veteran. But what we saw with that is we actually put someone in charge who's very, very connected to Israel, who is willing to just give Israel the Golan Heights. Could you see a situation where Israel doesn't even need to go to war with Turkey because they have a system like that where you can just start taking things diplomatically through, potentially if you got somebody who's an Assad agent who's in charge of the country, maybe you don't even need a war between the United States and Israel. Or, I'm not sure how that goes, but I had no idea when it came to Turkey that was actually the ruling class right now.
Yes. I think so. I mean, look, there are three major strengths of Israel. That makes it a very formidable enemy, right? First, it has nuclear weapons. It's the only country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons. You can actually attack Israel because they will use the deception option against you. That's number one. Number two is that it has Mossad, and we all know that Mossad is the most effective intelligence agency in the world.
No doubt.
And the third is they have the Jewish diaspora, right? So there's a
lot of control around the world.
Yeah. Yep. So that's why I think that Israel will achieve the Pax Judaica project.
As we're talking about,
They would stop spying on each other and just live their lives straightforward and uncomplicated. All be a better world.
we were just kind of talking about, we're still talking about Greater Israel. I think it's very relevant because it's extremely relevant to what's happening today, and that is Israel and Lebanon. That's a huge linchpin in the piece to this. It's the linchpin in the piece to this. If the United States, because Iran has made it very clear that you are going to stop bombing Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and that is part of their requirements to the peace deal. We know that. We also know Israel's got no interest in stopping that because that's the end to the Greater Israel Project right there. And if peace is reliant on Israel not at war with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the United States basically either can leash Netanyahu or they can't. And I think we're really going to find out the power, who's in charge of things going forward. What's your thoughts on that? Because, I mean, again, from what I heard today, it was an hour into the new ceasefire that Israel, began bombing southern Lebanon again. And so if that can't get figured out, there's no peace, which means this Iran war just continues. What's your thoughts on what's going to happen between Israel, Lebanon, the United States, and Iran in those negotiations? How does that actually pan out in the long run? One final thing before I give it to you, because we could come to a full peace agreement. Everything's worked out, the straits open, and then Israel starts bombing Lebanon, and Iran immediately goes, okay, well, the straits closed again. And we just, after months and months of work, we go right back to stage one with, that fast we could evaporate all peace from that. What's your thoughts with that?
If I'm Netanyahu, I would continue to bomb Lebanon. Okay, why?
Interesting. Okay.
Because Lebanon is a wedge issue in Iran, right? You have the reformers in Tehran, the political leader basically, and you have the IRGC. And so the proxies are a very important part of the IRGC strategy for defeating the United States. And so if I'm Israel, basically, I want to create a situation where the political leadership in Tehran is having a major argument with the IRGC over Lebanon, right? So basically, the United States says, we'll give you everything. We'll give the Strait of Hormuz. We will
Uranium sanctions gone.
Yeah, exactly. But the proxies have to go, right?
Just that.
And that's it, right? Now it's a wedge issue. Now the conflict's now between the political leadership in Tehran and the IRGC. And you can imagine civil war breaking out over this issue, right?
Especially if the United States does the full 9 other points. I mean,
exactly.
Basically full surrender. The United States says we will surrender and give you everything you want.
That's
Our
right.
one condition is Israel's allowed to continue its war against Hezbollah, Hamas, and the proxies. I could see that. I could see that being something we eventually got. I don't know if Donald Trump. I think the problem might be Donald Trump. Can he politically? I think it makes sense, but can he politically come out to his base and say that? Hey, we gave up. We gave Iran everything they want, but at least Israel gets what they want. Americans are not. I mean, across the board, Americans will go, what is this? You know. So. But go on with your point.
So I think Netanyahu and Trump are a lot more politically savvy than people give them credit for. I mean, like Trump has been able to pull off so much crap these past
That's true.
few years.
That's
Can you imagine like a year ago? You know, we're having this conversation where Trump's gonna win an election. Mac's gonna fully support him, and then he's gonna do whatever the Israel lobby tells him to go start a war against Iran. You and I would both be like, well, the base will turn on him. You would have riots in the streets, and that does not happen. Okay, the base is still behind him.
He just blasphemed Christ and made him portray himself as Jesus, and his base was like, his evangelical base was like, no, it's okay, and it's like if that, you know, he attacked Pope, and you're like, you're like the most religious fanatics and most fanatical Protestant, evangelicals in the country, and they're okay with stuff like that. To your point. That's a great point with the cult base. Maybe his base probably would be fine with it because he would portray it as a win. You're right. That's actually kind of a misstep on me. You're right. His base would not care at all. I would care, right? I would go. A lot of us would go, "What the hell is this? Why did we spend $100 billion and lose 13 service members' lives for Iran to be 10 times stronger?" But at the same time, if it gives Israel everything they want, then yeah, his base probably does go. No, we're fine with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to underestimate Trump's political savvy. I think this guy's a lot smarter than people give him credit for.
Yeah. So I will say though, is we are on a timeline for Trump because to your point, he basically. Currently, he's pretty much done the opposite of almost everything he ran on. His base does support him for it. However, independents do not, right? And his overall approval rating is insanely low, anywhere from 34 to Fox News is the most generous poll out there, has him at, the last one was 39%. The midterms are coming. And so you also have that. In America, it's politics change up into the midterms, right? Where all of a sudden, this war with Iran and $5 gas prices, when we lead into the midterms, that might not be something anybody's willing to accept, even within his political base. Especially, I think, if Democrats sweep the midterms and they take the House, the Senate, and they actually have enough to actually just vote through war power resolutions and they just gut him completely and then just impeach him 17 times. The back half of his lame duck presidency could be, him basically not being able to do anything other than maybe, using the State Department through Marco Rubio to leverage a little bit of conflict that way. But I do think there's a pretty extreme timeline. And
it's
with
like
Israel,
you don't just impeach him once, you impeach him 17 times. Oh God, it's just attack, counterattack, attack, counterattack, attack, counter.
It's interesting that you say, if you're Israel, you continue to do it. Yeah, I think you do. I think Israel doesn't want this. If you're Israel, why the hell would you want this 10-point plan to go through? You want none of those 10 points to go through, right? You're trying to be the hegemonic superpower. And if we lift all, think about this, if we lift all sanctions from, which I hope we do. I mean, I hope the Middle East could have peace and Iran could be brought into the world and we could all live in harmony. Is that going to happen? Probably not. But if I'm Israel, I don't want Iran to be on sanctions. I don't want them to have control of the Strait of Hormuz. I don't want them to be able to enrich uranium. That doesn't do anything. I think it's good for America and Iran and the rest of the world, but they're the big loser there. And so to your point, why the hell would they? Why the hell would they let the ceasefire go through?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, like Israel has this once in a lifetime opportunity to achieve the Greater Israel Project.
This is it. I think this is their chance.
Yeah, this is it. Also, like, you would think the Democrats, if they really want to win the midterms, they could easily just go on like a no war platform. Like, and you think of like organized rallies all around the United States calling for like no war and an end to this war. Yep. Instead, they're just sitting back and like doing nothing. They do this congressional vote. They're
not just doing nothing. They're supporting the war in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
The political establishment is supporting the war. The blue MAGA Democrats, Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker. Chuck Schumer just voted to continue the war and give Donald Trump full power. So
I mean, everyone expects the midterms, the Democrats win, and then they impeach Trump, and that's what happened last time. But maybe not. The Democrats may run blue dog candidates, and then
they're definitely going to do that,
right? And then what happens, right? Then they'll impeach Trump if he does not escalate the war.
Yeah, that's true. And we already saw that. I mean, they just the Democrat Party just voted on, or the DNC just voted on banning or limiting AIPAC, and the vote failed. So the Democrat Party, which has basically like an 8% support for Israel in the entire party, the actual power establishment is in lockstep with Donald Trump on a lot of these things.
And there was I think yesterday or the day before there was this congressional vote, right, to force Trump to seek congressional approval. If you want
right, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
and it failed by one vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
This was theater, man. It
was a Democrat. It was a Democrat. That was the tiebreaker. Right? Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, these parties are in cahoots with each other, like
100%.
in this war. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see that when, especially with when it comes to Israel, when Netanyahu shows up to Congress, he gets a standing ovation from all 500 members. There's like 4 members who aren't, calling him His Excellency and things like that. So that's a good point. All right, I want to talk about three more topics, if you don't mind. Interesting ones. I want to talk about our NATO allies in Europe a little bit, because this is very, very different for the United States. If we go back to, except for, the Revolutionary War. I mean, Europe and the United States have been lockstep allies. Obviously, America, his lineage is from Europe. We're descendants of Europeans. But what we're seeing now is, not a single member of NATO or Europe has been willing to come to the aid of the United States. 100% of them have now declined to send actual naval power. And then in even more extreme countries like Spain. Spain is now cut off all trade with both Israel and the United States. And there's a lot of movement towards that. France has had a lot of issues with us, stopping us from being able to use military bases and airspace. What do you see going forward happening between the United States and Europe and NATO? Do you think NATO is pretty much on its way out, and you're going to see this sort of regional break to where the United States, maybe in the 21st century, Europe and the United States sort of break away, and we don't find ourselves as allies anymore? I mean, maybe not enemies, but
look, I think that Europe is a dumpster fire. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I mean, the problems that they're facing right now are just, I mean, it's threatening the survival of their own nation states, right? So you've got this mass immigration problem in Europe. So it's almost like population replacement.
True.
Where in 50 years' time, they're not going to be majority white anymore. That's the first issue. And this,
you have a population replacement. Listen,
and some of the France is almost there.
Yeah.
France is like 35% Muslim at this point. Good, bad, or indifferent, whether you like that or not. I mean, Sweden is getting up there as well. So is Germany. So is the UK. I mean, when you look at it as an actual percentage, I mean, we have nowhere near the immigration problem as Europe does at the moment. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, that's the first point. Second point is that Europe is committed to total war against Russia, especially Germany, Poland. They're calling up for a draft, right? So I think there was a rumor or a proposal to bar men under 45 from leaving Germany for more than 3 months without army permission. Right?
Wow. I
think they voted back because of a public outcry, but they're clearly moving towards a national draft. And what the Germans have actually said is that, well, we're not going to allow Muslim men to join the army. So it's a ridiculous situation where the Germans are going to stand. Yes.
So you're going to send all your ethnically Germans off to die, your young ethnically German men off to die, but not your young immigrant men. Okay, that sounds like a great plan. Yeah,
exactly. Okay,
right.
So that's point 2, where they're going to continue to fight Russia,
and
even though
Marianne Seigert back in the country gave her a German nationality when it was her grandmother who had to leave because of the Nuremberg laws. And Marianne Seigert, she's promoting her book, The Authority Gap, Why Women Are Not Taken Seriously and What We Can Do About It. Keep on pointing out, well, you guys would behave seriously, somebody would take them seriously.
It is in their best long-term interest to seek peace as soon as possible, because they're not going to beat Russia and Ukraine, okay? I mean, they're not. Yeah. And Russia's not going to go and invade Europe, because that's retarded. Russia would never do something like that.
No, I agree.
Point number 2. Point number 3 is that you have a huge aging crisis in Europe, where the population is becoming much older and therefore much more authoritarian and much more delusional. Okay, so Europe has this fascination with DEI that America was able to get rid of. They're obsessed with politics, they're obsessed with DEI, they're obsessed with bureaucracy, and this is stifling innovation. This is stifling entrepreneurship. It's killing the young people in Europe. Right, you got this aging crisis, and the last issue is their economies are no longer viable. Right, the European economy was basically based on importing cheap Russian energy and then making manufactured goods for China. And now they no longer have access to cheap Russian energy. They don't even have access to like Gulf energy as well, right?
Yeah,
so, and as you point out, the world doesn't make enough energy. America doesn't make enough energy to supply both Asia and Europe. So Europe
and us and America, and Canada in a lot of senses, yeah.
And then you have like these political leaders in Europe who are extremely unpopular, who are just incompetent.
True.
Like Macron, Starmer.
Starmer is super unpopular, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And and Macron has been unpopular for the past 20 years, and he's still in power, which is unbelievable. But yeah, no, I mean, like I just think that Europe is completely screwed, and it's just a question of like how screwed are they, and will they drag America into their
Well, they tried with the Ukraine war. I mean,
well,
to your
they're
point,
also shooting themselves in the head.
Europe and really France, Macron has been a huge problem with this. The main reason why that war never came to any conclusion is because Europe gets in there every time we come close to a peace deal, Europe's the one that goes in there and tries to fuck it all up, because Europe has got no interest in that war between Ukraine and Russia ending. And, they did try to pull us into that conflict. Europe did, right? And still kind of are trying to pull us into that conflict. And so, yeah, I mean, to your point, they're not going to beat Russia. I mean, history says, what was Europe going to try to...
You come into Ukraine and we'll go to Iran.
Invade Russia, like history has shown.
Good luck.
That's like trying to invade Afghanistan, right? It's the graveyard of empires for a reason. Or Persia, right? It's like there's a reason why no one since Alexander the Great has been able to, even step foot in any of these countries for a lot of, Afghanistan and at least long term. That's really interesting take on on NATO. And with that, a final part of that question was, do you think that the United States and Europe break apart alliance-wise? Because I mean, culturally, you're not wrong. There's going to be a huge difference in cultures and things like that as Europe's moving one direction and we're not moving that direction. Could you see us just completely break? I mean, NATO falling apart feels like we just cut off trade with Spain. I mean, it feels like we're headed there, like in the next couple of years even.
Yeah.
Well, what Trump wants to do is support right-wing political factions in Europe, right? So Trump
we just saw that in Hungary.
Yeah, J.D. Vance went to Hungary to support Viktor Orban, and that didn't really work out. He supports the AfD in Germany. He supports Vox in Spain. He supports Marine Le Pen's party in France. So I think that Trump wants to support these right-wing populists in Europe because they align more with his vision. But the EU bureaucracy is just completely authoritarian, right? They will do whatever possible in order to sabotage these populist factions. So I think at the end of the day, America and Europe are heading towards a major divorce.
I was just going to say, to your point, there's 16,000 people in prison in Britain for things they've said on social media posts right now. That's not Russia. 16,000 people in the United Kingdom are currently in prison for, saying mean things online. I believe there's more. I believe the crackdown on that is worse than, like, objectively worse than it is in the places we like to call authoritarian, Russia, China, places like that. You're actually seeing Europe be far more extreme. And Australia is headed down that road too, which is kind of scary. But Europe is definitely moving towards this, like, extreme surveillance state mixed in with bureaucracy, woke politics, and authoritarianism. So, yeah, it is scary.
And this would be fine if, say, crime was being reduced, but crime's not being reduced, right?
Right.
So if you are a criminal, you are much less likely to get visited by the police than if you are a normal person, complaining about the rise of crime in Britain.
Yep,
in a social
that's
media,
true.
Right? But it's just
that's
absurd.
True. Yeah. Okay. Second to last one. Last one's going to be predictions, just because I'm going to force you to make some predictions because, that's what you do. Literally, that's your thing. But before we do that, last one I want to talk about when I had you on, it's a little bit of an aside. I wanted to talk about China, Taiwan. That's sort of my lane of expertise militarily. I mean, you're from China, you live in China, so you know even more than I do. What is your feeling? Because there's a lot of rumors about this, right? Like this war in Iran, all the focus on it. If the United States, is here in Venezuela and it's looking at Cuba and it's also looking at, fighting a war with Iran, we're spread too thin. People think this is the perfect time for China to militarily take Taiwan. I always say, just at least because I know the United States plan, if that war were to kick off, and I can talk about that, but I want to get your take first, and then I'll give you what I thought. Now, let me give you what I thought first, so that way everybody can see if I'm wrong or not. But my feeling, at least, in first group, we have a lot of Chinese national Green Berets, guys who actually are from mainland China, who go to places like Guam and actually enlist and join the U.S. military. So we have a lot of actually Chinese-born Green Berets, and worked with quite a few. And talking to one who mainland China, he grew up in Beijing, I believe. He was telling me, I was asking him about it. Do you think China will invade? And he said, really, it's more likely that China sort of plays a long game and takes Taiwan diplomatically, much like they did Hong Kong. Me personally, I think that sort of seems like a much better route for China. They also have a much, you guys have a much longer outlook on things than we do in the United States. But also, I mean, the difficulty of taking Taiwan, the island is going to be extremely hard. And also, I'll let you explain it, but China, Taiwan, it's like kind of like the American Civil War in a way, right? You've got Americans killing Americans at the end of the day, even though I know Taiwanese and Chinese don't say they're the same, but I mean, people from Taiwan are those who fled, right? The Chinese Communist Party. So ethnically, pretty much all the same. What's your thoughts on? Do you personally think China makes a play militarily for Taiwan in the near future? Let's say, given all of the insanity that is geopolitics right now.
Right. So I've always believed that China and Taiwan will come to a diplomatic solution. And we're seeing this play out with the KMT chairman visiting China and being greeted by the top leadership in Beijing, including President Xi. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are elements within Taiwan and within China who believe that over time, reunification is almost an inevitability because of these very close diplomatic, family, and economic relationships. Okay, and I think that's a strategy in both Taiwan and in China. The problem is Japan. Okay, this is right. Okay, so
interesting.
Because a few months ago, Prime Minister Takahashi has said that Taiwan is core to Japan's strategic interests, meaning that if there were ever a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, that Japan would come in the aid of Taiwan. And this caused a huge uproar, as you can imagine, in China. So much so that Chinese...
Given that back history between your two countries, especially.
Given so, I mean, it's the backlash is so severe now that basically China and Japan have broken off diplomatic relationships. And before you had thousands of Chinese tourists going every day to visit Japan.
For sure,
but now that's not the case. Tourist programs have all canceled visits to Japan. I work at a school, and I was told by my school that if you visit Japan, you might be blacklisted by the government. Sorry to interrupt. Is this so? I lived in Japan from 2020 to 2023, and so we would see Chinese tourists all the time everywhere. I was in Okinawa, and a lot of people don't realize Okinawa is a 20-minute fighter flight. Very close. A 20-minute fighter, like our fighter jets, are to Taiwan in 20 minutes from Okinawa. So I mean, they're extremely close. And so this must have been somewhat recently where
in the last couple of years that this happened?
No, well, the last 3 months. Okay, so
very, very recent. Okay,
yeah, it's a huge break off, and the logic is very simple from the Japanese perspective, right? Because you're Japan, you know Japan. It's a trade dependent economy. It doesn't have its own natural resources.
Yep.
If Taiwan and China were to reunify, in theory, Taiwan could be used to embargo Japan, cutting Japan off from the Strait of Malacca.
And the Strait of Malacca into the Strait of Taiwan. That's where all for the viewers, guys. That's where all of the oil that comes out.
Yes.
And actually, go ahead. You keep talking. I actually have the map right here. I'll pull up and show them.
Right. So this is an existential crisis for Japan, right? So Japan cannot permit Taiwan and China to reunify, and so I think that's the real issue facing China in the short term. Remilitarize a resurgent Japan, and Japan, because of the war in the Middle East, it is remilitarizing its its navy, and because I mean this is an existential crisis for Japan, and you talk about this where Japan's going to suffer a lot more if this war continues than China, right? So you can imagine Japan trying to send an expeditionary force to the Strait of Hormuz in order to open it up. And look, at the end of the day, and you know this, but Japan has the best blue water navy in East Asia. China doesn't have a blue water navy, so and we can expect more conflicts arising in the South China Sea, especially in this territory. So the real issue is not actually Taiwan, China. The real issue is China, Japan.
Interesting. I didn't even. I mean, again, that was recent because in 2023, we definitely didn't have that going on. And also, you have in the South China Sea is such a diplomatic sort of chaos. You talk Philippines. I worked a decent amount in the Philippines and just like understanding the Chinese and American connection there with the government. And there's just a lot of vying for power and control in the South China Sea right now. And so that I didn't even think about the fact that Taiwan as an island, to your point, that's one of the fears for, as you know, for China is Taiwan and the United States potentially cut off the Strait of Taiwan and and can stranglehold Beijing, because we did all the planning and everything for if the United States and China, or excuse me, if China invaded Taiwan, the United States, what our plan would be. So that's one of those sort of safe holds that Taiwan has with the United States is, hey, we can use artillery to sink your ships if you try to put them through, much like Iran is doing right now with the Strait of Hormuz. Taiwan has that, but if Taiwan is reunified, I didn't even think about that. If Taiwan is reunified with mainland, now they can embargo Korea, both South Korea and Japan, from their oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. And there's nothing they could do about it. There's nothing Japan or South Korea could do to stop that. So that's so yeah. So your thought process is you see a diplomatic reunification between the two. That's what I think is going to happen. Instead of I'm not saying it's for sure to happen, but you could see if the two were to reunify, you see it through diplomatically rather than China launching a massive war and killing a couple million Taiwanese, and that I just don't see that happening. It just doesn't really feel like that's what. And also, it seems like there would be a lot of anger and backlash because you mentioned families, right? And economic ties. I think people don't realize that there's tons of people that have family in Taiwan and family in mainland, and then economically, I don't think people in America realize how close Taiwan and China actually are economically tied to each other. I think we think like, oh, they're enemies, and it's like, well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Right. No, there are millions of Taiwanese who are doing business in mainland China. They settle down, they have families. China and Taiwan do tremendous trade. So if China were just to like economically isolate Taiwan, basically impose tariffs, the Taiwanese economy would be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and man, but China also doesn't really want to do that because Taiwan has things like super chip semiconductors that it is the country that produces those and makes them for all of us, the United States and China. China's also relying on that. So China, it's one of those things where I feel like they could you can hurt each other, but why? What would be the strategic positive outcome for either of those countries to go to full scale war with each other? It just doesn't seem like. But again, I'm asking you as someone who knows the cultures and everything like that a lot better than I do.
Look, I'm Chinese culturally, and I can tell you, like, Chinese are very pragmatic people. Chinese care about the economy, and that's about it. Right? So if we can use money to resolve conflicts, we'll use money to resolve the conflict. And going to war is going to be much more expensive than right. So Chinese are very pragmatic people, and that's why China is not going to militarily challenge the supremacy of the United States because it's too costly in the long term.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, that's I wanted to get your take on that while I had you on, because typically it's just me, ranting and raving, and I'd like to think I know a decent amount, but nowhere near as much as you do on that. All right, final one I want to do before we wrap it up is predictions. Okay, I want you to give, if you're willing to, you've probably already done it, right? But obviously you predicted that the United States will lose the war. That doesn't mean Iran wins, obviously, as you mentioned. But what's your prediction? What's your actual final predictions of how does this end? I think that's the big one. Does it end in a nuclear war? Does it end in a ground invasion where 500,000 people die, or does it end where we give up? There's a lot of options here. What's your actual prediction right now for how does this war with Iran actually end?
Right. So I think in round one of this war, like me in the past 7-8 weeks, Iran overperformed. And the Americans were completely surprised by the ferocity of the Iranian response. Trump himself said he didn't expect the Iranians to close up the Strait of Hormuz, and he didn't expect the Iranians to attack the GCC. Okay, so the Americans
I didn't either, but they did it.
We're completely taken aback. But I think in round two, once the ceasefire ends, I think they'll go back to war. And I think that the Americans will recalibrate, and the Americans will develop a much more effective strategy to strangle Iran. So my predictions for how the war will progress over the next few months is threefold. Okay, first, I think the Americans will launch a ground incursion, and the main purpose. Yeah, the main purpose is to strangle Iran economically, mainly by taking over Kark Island and Qassam Island. and sending troops in the coastline to block Iran's ability to export oil, as well as to block Iran's ability to collect tolls, right? And these are the two main income streams for Iran. And so now Iran's going to face financing issues, okay? So that's the first pillar. Second pillar is to activate ethnic insurgent groups throughout Iran, mainly the Kurds and also the Balochs near Pakistan.
The Kurds isn't going to work because we already armed them in Iran. This is the Green Beret mission set. This is literally what we do. And the Kurds took all the weapons and said "fuck off" to the United States. But to your point, there's 10 different ethnic groups that we could arm and equip as a resistance force. So I get what you're saying.
Right, but the point is, like, the Kurds didn't want to be abandoned and betrayed again. Like they've been
we fucked them over and over again. Right. No, I get it. If I was the Kurds, I'd be like, I don't know.
But the point is, like, if they see the tide of the war turning in favor of the Americans, if the Americans have forward operating bases throughout Iran that can protect them, right? If they're protected by American aerial supremacy, then they'll be much more likely to fight. They're opportunists, right? So that's the second pillar. And the third pillar, which I think will be the most effective, is the Americans are going to try to strangle Tehran, okay? Meaning Tehran is a city of 10 million people. It needs water, it needs electricity, and it needs food, right? Well, what you can do is you can bombard the roads and infrastructure so it can't get food. You can destroy the reservoirs so it lacks water, and you can destroy the power plants.
Just commit a bunch of war crimes.
This is war, man.
I get it. No, you're giving your prediction of what will happen, and we've already, keep in mind, the United States has already committed a shit ton of war crimes in this war, so we will 100% do that.
And the intention is to decimate the state's capacity to provide basic services to the people, so the people become angry and revolt against you, right? Which forces a political solution. So the idea is to apply as much pressure as possible on the people of Tehran, so that the political leadership is forced to accept American terms in negotiations. Okay, so that's how I think the Americans will fight this war in round two. It will be much more strategic. It's going to apply pressure points as much as possible in order to force a political solution.
Real quick on that, because there is concerns, right? You launch ground invasions, potentially you put boots on the ground, people die. There's going to be a lot of U.S., especially if we try to take Targ Island, right? Ballistic missiles start raining down, drones start raining down. 100%, we're going to have substantially more U.S. soldiers killed. That's part of war, right? I went and fought the wars myself. I know what it includes. Yeah. Do you think that, look at the backlash off 13 dead soldiers. You start seeing hundreds of soldiers killed, thousands of soldiers killed. Do you think that'll have, because we look at Vietnam, we look at Afghanistan and Iraq. The reason why we abandoned those was public discontent at the fact that, young boys are dying. And there's already this war is already so unpopular. Do you think that would have, I don't think Trump would give a shit, but do you think that would have enough effect to stop that plan for the United States? Once, all of a sudden, hey, you start taking more losses than you thought, and then the backlash becomes extreme. You got to carry through at that point. Do you think the United States has the will for it?
Well, first of all, you can't really fight this war from the air, right? The Americans are losing too many airframes as it is, right?
Yep.
Right. But also you're losing airframes, which is very expensive, right? So you've lost like 13 soldiers, but you've lost I don't know how many planes, right? These planes,
close to 30 now.
Right, like one F-15 is $9 million, one F-35 is $100 million. So if you continue to fight this war from the air, you're going to bankrupt your military. These are very expensive, sophisticated machines, and so you need ground troops in order to establish aerial supremacy. Like, this,
100%.
But you have to worry about economics, right? So you have to use ground troops. That's point one. Point two is you're right in that there's political backlash, but you'd be surprised by how people become desensitized over time. And the classic example is Gaza, where there's really committed genocide in Gaza, and people became normalized, desensitized to that over time.
They're doing it right now. They're doing it right now. They don't even report the news on it anymore. It's not even a story.
So you're right in that. Yes, we hope that there's backlash because innocent people are getting killed, but
this is a good point you're making.
Gaza just showed us that people can become extremely desensitized, especially if the global economy is suffering, right? If you're worried about gas prices, if you're worried about not having a job, if you're worried about the global economy collapsing, you're not going to be that concerned about ground troops in Iran.
You know why that's such a good point is because no one cared when American soldiers died in Afghanistan and Iraq in the back decade of the war. We had guys getting killed. 2018 was my last trip, and we had dudes getting killed in 2018. That wasn't even on the news. Americans care, right? Like they care, but was that affecting policy? Like, no, nobody gave a shit. So to your point, we lost thousands of U.S. troops over the back decade, and it was never on the news. Nobody cared. To your point, I didn't even think about the desensitizing factor of this is a new fresh war, and the media cycle is on it.
Yes.
But after 6 months, after a year, and it's like people get fatigued, right?
There are certain media podcasters who only care about who killed Charlie Kirk.
Where they're just like, I don't even want to fucking hear about this war anymore. And so, to your point,
Candace Owens is the black African American Marilyn Monroe, but she's no more diligent in being Queen of the United States than Marilyn Monroe, or her nemesis, Jackie Onassis.
Point all of a sudden, then that's not the backlash. I didn't even think about the desensitization I can't even say it. You know what I'm trying to say? Desensitization of the populace, and that's a real thing that that I didn't even think about. So that's definitely I will agree with you.
Serious problem, and that is the number one problem. If the people don't care, nobody else is going to care. So that's it for right now. I'll probably do another one later today, another video.